the one who took part in the conspiracy against the tyrant, the villain who destroyed the empire, the enemy who took away his family and beloved. He then asked Artisia to come up with a plan to save the empire. Artisia was badly beaten and lay on the red carpet. Emma screamed that she was a heartless, inhuman creature who killed Abe. Artisia didn't understand at all what Abe had done to her. Emma screamed and asked how Artisia could do this to her own nephew. Emma believed that Artisia should suffer just as much as Abe. Lawrence told Emma to calm down, but she didn't understand how that was possible. After all, her child had died, and she didn't understand why Lawrence was so calm. Abe was Lawrence's son, and he should have sympathized. But Lawrence said that Emma should understand that this was a misunderstanding, because Tia was like a sister to him. Emma promised that she would definitely take revenge, and fell to the floor. First, they made Artisia a criminal by framing her without a child, and then the accusations only grew. In fact, she was indeed guilty of many sins, and Lawrence knew about most of them, so there was no need to falsify the crimes. It was a conspiracy orchestrated by Emperor Lawrence himself. Lawrence approached Tia and said that he could not believe that she was capable of such a crime. He asked if she really killed Abe, and Artisia looked up. Emma screamed that after the maid's visit, Abe began to bleed black and died. Tia's maid was brought in, and the emperor said he wanted to ask her a question. He asked if it was true that she had given Abe poison on the orders of the Marchioness Rosan. The girl confirmed this and said that first, the Marchioness Rosan killed Abe, and then she was going to kill the emperor himself. Everyone was in complete shock, and Lawrence finally decided to ask if Tia had any words of defense. Artisia turned to His Highness and said that the emperor was the only legitimate ruler of this empire. Now everything is in his hands, and Lawrence must stop shifting responsibility onto others. This was her last advice to him. One of the knights grabbed Artisia, shouting that she was impudent and did not know her place. Lawrence ordered that she be taken away immediately and the traitor be locked up in prison. After this, Artisia was tortured and repeatedly forced to sign some papers. Then she was put on trial, in which the emperor himself and several aristocrats participated. Despite the relationship, her crime was too serious to be forgiven, especially considering that her actions almost led to the collapse of the empire. Lawrence ordered her tongue and hands to be cut off, for the blood of innocence, so that she would become an example for others. They were told to make sure she stayed alive. When the sentence was carried out, Artisia was chained. As a child, her mother told her that Lawrence was a good man, and that Artisia should be worthy of him. She understood this, and Artesia's mother was Melara, the wife of Marquise Rosanna during the reign of Emperor Gregor. According to the laws of the empire, married people were forbidden to have relations with unmarried women, so those in power entered into marriages of convenience and kept their partners under control. Michael Rosan gave Melara to the emperor in exchange for rich sapphire deposits. Soon Melara gave birth to his son. It was Lawrence, but Artisia was not the emperor's daughter. The elder brother was the son of the emperor, and his sister was a copy of Michael. His Majesty, showing mercy, allowed the girl to live. It was believed that Artisia should never have been born. That's why she constantly heard the same thing from her mother. She had to be kind to her brother, because it was only thanks to him that she was alive. If it weren't for Lawrence, they wouldn't have been able to survive as a Marquise family. She had to live for her brother. For their salvation, he had to become emperor. And when Lawrence ascends to the throne, he certainly won't mistreat his only sister. Now, their entire family's happiness depended on Lawrence's success, and Artisia had to understand that. Artisia didn't remember her mother ever loving her. Now she didn't feel like she was part of this family and their history at all. She was only praised when she did something useful for Lawrence. Only when Lawrence said that his sister had made delicious tea would his mother speak approvingly of her. The property of the Marquise Rosan brought considerable material benefits. Artisia was not stupid at all. She understood that her mother would never be kind to her. But it was too difficult to contain the desire to be loved, which had arisen in childhood. It was easy to find reasons to justify it. Lawrence's mother and Artisia were related by blood. If Lawrence fails, they will all die together. Never before had a family claiming the throne survived. Artisia was willing to do anything to survive. She had a talent for conspiracies and crimes. She betrayed loyal servants, leading them to death, and undermined the political position of the empire. Even more small but dark deeds were committed in the palace. Everything that caused pain to citizens and took many lives was due to Artesia's fault. She used St. Lycia, the symbol of the people's hope, and ended up destroying her. It was all for Lawrence. If it was a fight for the throne, it was considered natural. Her brother said she did a good job. Even if it was just words of comfort, she did everything indifferently and cold-bloodedly. In the end, Lawrence achieved his goal and donned the imperial crown. Artesia played a key role in his rise, but when it was all over, she silently stepped aside, demanding nothing. It was all because she was afraid. She stood aside amidst the general noise, not saying a word. Because of this, she destroyed all information about the organization that she had built over the years with great effort. At that time, it seemed to her that the affection between her brother and sister could save her life. But she knew too much. She had too many sins. So Lawrence had her tongue cut out so she could no longer speak. And he cut off her hands so that there would be no possibility of writing anything down. The law was simple. When the hunt was over, the dog was no longer needed. Artesia was that dog for Lawrence, and prison became her cauldron. "What goes around comes around," she laughed. Too loud. Her laughter attracted the attention of the guards. Even without a tongue one can laugh. She knew her sins too well. And Artesia did not want to be justified or forgiven only out of pity. But only once was Lycia truly a saint. Then Artesia threatened her and forced the saint to marry Lawrence. She did not ask, because she was sure that Lycia was offended by her, and the saint said that perhaps the girl would really feel better if she held a grudge. The saint asked in surprise what she should do now, since she had already forgiven Artesia. Suddenly, the answer escaped her pale lips. Sacred influence and symbolism were needed to fill Lawrence's emptiness, to give him what he so lacked. And for this, Artesia used it completely. Suddenly, the saint became ill. All the citizens of the empire were happy to hear that the saint would also become a princess. At Lawrence's coronation, flowers presented by the Empress were laid out along the walls of the palace like a mountain. The empire covered her body with golden furs, and she spread silk before her feet. A woman born into a beggar's family on the northern outskirts became someone who could now afford all the luxury in the world. But if you remember the time when she first came out to people without a single piece of jewelry, or the day she helped in a region ravaged by infection, dressed in simple peasant clothes, now her skin has turned yellow, and her beautiful golden hair with a red tint has lost its shine and has become brittle and dry. The full red lips also faded, and it was Artesia who was the cause of all this. It was Artesia who sent her to this hell. She thought she could protect Lycia, and she felt sorry that she couldn't protect her from this cold place and from Lawrence. This also concerned his complex about his legitimacy. Legitimacy is the voluntary recognition by the people of the right of the authorities to make binding decisions. This union gave rise to a feeling of anger and inferiority in him towards Artesia, the Empress beloved by the people. Lycia, imprisoned in a golden prison, almost withered away. The servants screamed that the Empress had fainted. Lycia's sacred power was so great that it could save a person from death. But it proved useless for her own illness. She told Artesia that she was okay. It was her own fault that she ended up here, not Artesia's. Whatever the reason, and whatever Artesia's attitude it was, ultimately Lycia who agreed to marry Lawrence. The saint also noted that she knew how terrible things Artesia had to endure. And although this cannot serve as an excuse for her actions, the saint decided to forgive her before others. Therefore, Artesia may not include Lycia in the great burden she bears. If one day Artesia meets Mr. Cedric, she will have to tell him that Lycia lived without regrets. Artesia replied that she understood and would definitely pass this on. As she was dying, the saint asked the girl for forgiveness. Apparently, she was unable to save her. These were her last words. Artesia couldn't understand whether she had dreamed all this or whether these were memories of Lycia. She had been in this dungeon for so long that she had already lost track of time. Suddenly, someone spoke to her, but she did not understand what they wanted from her. Looking closer, she saw that Venia was standing in front of her. Venia was Lycia's maid. She admitted that she had never imagined that the Emperor's representative would end up with nothing. And then she added that perhaps the only reason she wasn't killing her now was because of Xenia. Artesia did not understand why this servant was saving her and freeing her from her shackles. In her state, she could not think clearly. All she knew was that she was being taken away somewhere. She didn't understand where exactly and why. She was placed in a cart with linen and taken away from the imperial palace. The torture and the journey here had worn her body down. It was too much. She was so exhausted that after taking just a couple of sips of the tea he had brewed for her, she fell asleep again. The man looked at her and realized that the Marchioness Rosanna had woken up. Cedric stood before her, noting that despite being the best schemer in the entire empire, she was unable to save herself. The girl didn't understand why she was now in Cedric's military camp. Artesia didn't understand why he kidnapped her. Or maybe he just brought her to this place. One day, she blew up a dam on the Ava River to slander Cedric. By order of Emperor Gregor, he had been assigned to deal with affairs on the western border of the empire, and at that very moment, he was heading back. However, instead of returning to the capital, Cedric withdrew his army to deal with the damage caused by the flood. Because he disobeyed a direct order, the emperor lost confidence in him. Eventually, Cedric fell into disgrace and became a persecuted person. Cedric asked Artesia for help in stopping Lawrence's tyranny, claiming that he needed her. He begged the Marchioness Rosanna to do something. She still had her sharp mind. She was alive, which meant she still had a will, and therefore the ability to achieve anything. After all, she herself had already felt Lawrence's cruelty. On the way here, Artesia remembered how she had already seen a similar picture in the cart. The once prosperous city of Barga, which produced the best wine in the empire, has disappeared. According to Venia, it happened 12 years ago when Lawrence exposed Archduke Roigar as a criminal who was allegedly preparing a secret crime. There were many other places in the same terrible state. Artesia thought about the senseless slaughter in the cart just before she lost consciousness. The Archduke knelt before Artesia, his enemy, and said that she must find a way to overthrow Lawrence, no matter how powerful he was. His servants, and he himself, could only understand military affairs and could not imagine how to equalize forces. Artesia didn't know what to do, feeling the weight of moral duty. Never before had she heard such words from Lawrence, whom she had sworn to serve for the rest of her life. She wanted to live her life without regrets until the very end. It was her own decision when she first stained her hands with blood. He realized that perhaps even Artesia would not find a way to overthrow such a powerful man and stop what was happening. But alas, emotions still overwhelmed her, and he said that he would later appoint people to accompany her to the village. It would be better that way. Let her spend the rest of her life in peace. The lady did not have a clear plan, but she had the means to implement it. It was an ancient magic. It had been a long time since it disappeared from this world. One of the reasons for its disappearance was human sacrifice, but the main reason was that too few people knew how to draw magic circles correctly. But Artesia was fluent in the ancient language. It wasn't dead. If she couldn't pull the power to her side, she could still take it all back, even if it was now in the enemy's hands. She bit the remaining part of her tongue several times and chewed the mucous membrane to collect the blood. There would be no other chance. Artesia had to control herself and focus. Suddenly, a glow flared in her tent. The ideal victim turned out to be the Marchioness Rosanna. At that moment, Cedric entered her tent and froze in complete shock. In her next life, Artesia would like to fulfill his will. That's what she thought then. But why she came back remains unclear. Waking up, the girl went to the mirror and realized she really had returned. Perhaps she misunderstood magic. It was too late to turn back time in exchange for her own life, but she was still alive. Error in the circle or something else. This could have been the reason for her survival. She made her decision. In exchange for bowing to the demon, Cedric received power, and now he would dirty his hands for her. This happened on the 2nd day of June, 482 in the Empire. 8 days ago, Artesia turned 18. There are still 2 years left until she can inherit the title of Marchioness Rosanna. It was quite hot last night, and Mother asked if Lawrence had slept well. He confirmed that he had. Lawrence also noticed that as night fell, it became less stuffy. His mother noted that he should let her know in advance if he had no appetite, and then she would ask the chef to prepare his favorite cold smoky soup. Artesia wants to get a good idea of how quickly things are progressing. The mother noticed that Lawrence had not yet sat down to eat, and Artesia was already getting up from the table. Artesia replied that she just wasn't very hungry. Her mother was going to scold her, reminding her that she should observe table etiquette. But Artesia said she just wanted to visit the temple on the outskirts of town and hoped Lawrence wouldn't mind. Lawrence said she could go, and then the mother smiled. Artesia was grateful to her brother for his permission. The mother asked Lawrence in surprise why he had suddenly become so caring, and it seemed that he was now really thinking about his younger sister. When Artesia left the room, she was met by a maid. She noticed that the lady had eaten poorly again and was surprised why she had left so early. She usually sits longer. It was Alice, the first maid Artesia had personally chosen, who proved so loyal that she was once poisoned instead of her mistress. Artesia was very happy to see Alice and just smiled at her. The maid felt that something had happened and she needed to do something urgently, but Artesia turned away and said that nothing special had happened. Her character did not allow her to show how touched she was by the concern. She turned to Alice and said that she was going to the temple. Alice smiled and offered to help with the packing if the lady needed it. Then Artesia came closer and whispered something in the maid's ear. She told us to put more meat in our sandwiches for the road and not to take a tea set with us for the picnic. Artesia also asked to call Sophia so that she could help with clothes, and Alice did not strain herself. Sophia asked what kind of hairstyle the lady wanted. Artesia replied that she would just like a neat hairstyle. When the hairstyle was ready, Artesia said that she wanted something beautiful. Sophia smiled and noted that their miss had really grown to such an age. But Artesia herself did not understand what was being discussed and asked again. Then Sophia added that the lady simply wanted to be beautiful and deal with handsome men. The Marchioness told Sophia to stop talking nonsense, saying that she was simply going to the temple. Sophia thought that the lady was also waiting for this, but she replied that she did not understand what kind of nonsense had come into her head. One of the maids noted that the girl should understand what she was getting into. If you think about the Marquise's age, she has now become a real pearl of great value in high circles. However, she did not have time to finish, because Artesia's mother entered the room. The maid immediately bowed when she saw the Marquis's wife in front of her. The Marquise glanced around the room and looked intently at her daughter. She wondered if Artesia with such a face was really going to seduce someone. Artesia asked her mother what would happen if such power was concentrated in the hands of priests. The woman sat down in the chair next to her, and then Artesia asked if her brother was going anywhere today. She was sure of it, but her mother replied that it was none of her business and expressed the hope that Lawrence would not be carried away by some chatty schemer. Artesia assured her mother that there was no need to worry because Lawrence was a wise man. Then the Marquise smiled and said that it was true. Artesia's brother was not at all like most men. However, she admitted that she is worried that when men fall in love, they often forget about their mothers. But she doesn't want this, and she hopes that Artesia won't do this. The girl was silent for a while, trying to say something. In the end, Artesia promised that she would always be on her mother's side. The mother smiled and confirmed. Of course, because she was her own daughter. A little later, the maid reported that the lady's premonition was confirmed. Everything was ready. The Marchioness smiled and wished him a good trip. It was necessary to go to the temple, leave a donation, and freshen up a bit. After all, the temple servants also need to be taken care of. The hairstyle, of course, didn't turn out the best, but the girl just said that she understood everything. Sophia asked the lady if everything was okay with Liana. The Marquise replied that yesterday, like today, this was not the first time. The maid agreed, but still tried to help, and then the Marchioness said to just help her with her clothes. Soon the lady had a new hairstyle and was wearing a smart dress. The maid noted that she was especially good and sweet today. Her hair was slightly curled, but she straightened it immediately. It looked beautiful, although the words sounded a little out of place. This was not quite in her character. And at that moment, Alice entered the room stunned by the appearance of her mistress. Alice noticed that the lady looked delightful, and it would be wonderful if she always looked like that. The lady responded with restraint that this was of course flattering, but such attempts would have no effect. She then asked if everything had been done, as she had asked. The maid did not understand that it was Artesia who ordered the food to be wrapped for the journey, but as she was told, everything was put in the carriage. After this, Artesia got ready and headed towards the exit. Now she was sure that the future would definitely change. The military camp was outside the Empire of Crates. Now is not the time to be stubborn. Just do what needs to be done, or at least make the situation better. In any case, Emperor Lawrence had no intention of separating the Archduke from the Western troops. Therefore, they should simply carry out a reformation in the Ephron order and not resort to introducing troops. Of course, the Western troops were stronger, but they had no honor, only silver and glory. Cedric turned to the frail and said that these soldiers had been suffering for over a year. He also noted that, despite what was happening, they were still paid pennies. Wealth was not the main thing. Even if conquest brought glory without honor and pride for the Western troops, it could end in dissolution. And if this happens, the entire empire will be under threat. The young man did not know what to do, and then Cedric said that he was going to ask for reconciliation. The butler asked if it would really help. He thought it might be worth a try, to be honest. He had had a disturbing dream and wanted to visit the temple at the first opportunity. The boy was surprised to hear that the butler had a dream. He asked again, but Cedric didn't answer. And I began to think that the dream might have been about a girl. She cried silently, and large tears ran down her cheeks. Seeing this, everything inside him seemed to shrink. One way or another, this dream left behind bitterness. Friel dismounted and asked what was the matter, and the man informed him that a wheel had fallen off their carriage. He asked if they could fix it, and the butler assured him it was no problem. Then Artisia approached Cedric and thanked him, but he replied that it was not worth it. He was amazed. Standing in front of him was the same girl from his dreams. He was sure. It was she, the one he had dreamed about. After some time, his servants finished repairing her carriage. The girl sincerely apologized for delaying them. However, Cedric's servant suddenly said that there was no need to apologize. Helping those in need was quite natural for them. However, she looked like a noble lady, and it was dangerous to travel without protection. She explained that it was just a short trip to the temple. They were on their way now, but when they reached the temple, she would definitely thank him. The young man objected that there was no need to do this at all. Artisia turned and looked at Cedric. He bowed to her, and she said goodbye to him. He opened the carriage door and wanted to help her up. He extended his hand to her and asked her to accept help. The girl was surprised and didn't know how to react to this. Artisia froze, not understanding why Cedric was doing this. After thinking for a bit, she still put her hand in his. After some time looking out the window, she realized that they were almost there. She also noticed that Cedric was accompanying them. The maid also reported that they were almost there. They stopped at the temple, and Cedric went on about his business. At the temple, the young Marquise Rosanna was greeted with respect. Artisia was grateful that the butler came out to greet her. She also said that she had brought beeswax with herbs and wanted to offer it to the saint. He noted that the saint would be delighted with her hospitality from the bottom of her heart. After this, they entered the temple, and Artisia began to pray. Even though it was all for the sake of using magic, she asked for forgiveness for sacrificing herself. Despite her decision to serve these fools, Artisia believed that Archduke Ephron was a worthy man and needed to be looked after. She asked that the one who was dangerous be protected, the fox's daughter. The priest asked Artisia with interest if she would like to meet with the bishop to discuss issues or get advice about what was happening. Artisia replied that there was no need for that. Her wishes were simply to enjoy a cup of tea and take a little rest from the stressful events. The priest offered to prepare a gazebo for her so she could relax. Artisia thanked him and added that she had another request no less important. She explained that the knights who had accompanied them on their journey had helped them, and she wished to thank them. Her request was that the priest escort her maid to them. Artisia insisted that her gratitude should not go unnoticed, and the priest readily agreed to help. After some time, her maid was sent to the knights. Some time later, Artisia sat in a cozy gazebo, enjoying the peace and waiting for what the day would bring. Lost in thought, she felt a little relaxed. Suddenly, she turned and saw Cedric approaching her. He approached with dignity as always, but his gaze was more serious than usual. Artisia realized they had to reintroduce themselves to each other, since her name now carried different weight. She introduced herself as Artisia Rosanna, reserved and calm. Cedric, as Artisia had expected, knew that she was the daughter of the Marchioness Rosanna. She confirmed this feeling, his gaze pierced her, as if he already knew everything about her origins. Cedric noted that if she knew who he was the Archduke, and yet made a whole show of the broken carriage, then she probably also realized that he had no sympathy for her. Artisia looked down, realizing that her game had been exposed. He knew what she was thinking, and that left no room for further ambiguity. She felt an unpleasant realization wash over her. Cedric expressed bewilderment at how it could possibly happen, that a wheel had simply fallen off the aristocrat's carriage. There was irony in his eyes, but also a certain amount of bewilderment. The knights were served dinners as if everything had been planned in advance. Each knew what and when he was supposed to have. Everything happened with amazing coherence, as if in a carefully adjusted system. Artesia admitted openly that this was indeed the case. She had planned this moment in advance, just to talk to him, find a reason to talk, and understand what was bothering him. She was the same girl who had appeared to him in a strange dream not long ago. But now that she stood before him in reality, her eyes did not seem so soft. They were cold but bright like ice. Cedric, watching what was happening, said that he hoped that her actions would not be a waste of his time. He did not want to waste time on empty talk because business was more important than the whims of young ladies. He sat down next to her, but was in no hurry to start a conversation. Artesia, meanwhile, poured him a cup of tea, as if expecting it to help him relax a little, and give them both the opportunity to focus on the conversation. Cedric was puzzled by the behavior of the Marchioness's daughter, Rosanna. He could not understand why she behaved this way with him, why she seemed not afraid to express such frank requests that were not customary to speak about. At first, Cedric decided to just drink tea watching her actions. He did not know what to expect from the girl, but decided that it was better to wait and see how she would develop this conversation. He was ready for any turn of events. At some point, Artesia made up her mind and approached Cedric with an unexpected request. She expressed a desire for him to propose to her, even if it was only a formal one, so that she could solve her problem. Cedric choked on his tea when he heard these words. He hadn't expected to hear such a request. It was so unexpected that he began to cough, trying to digest what was said and figure out how to react to it. He noted with surprise that, to be honest, he would never have thought that the young aristocrat he had met just a few hours ago would suddenly put forward such serious and unusual proposals. Artesia reassured him by explaining that she was not asking for a real marriage. She simply wanted a formal union to help him with the problem that had been causing him so much trouble lately. Cedric asked again what exactly she was talking about and what exactly she meant. He clearly hadn't expected the conversation to take this turn and was interested in what she was trying to convey in this context. Artesia explained that His Majesty had been actively waging psychological warfare for 2 months. She could see the changes in his behavior and felt the weight of this hidden pressure. The problem was that the soldiers were not being paid as they should have been, which could have had disastrous consequences. One wrong move could have destroyed both the Western and Southern military structure. She was sure that the Archduke was worried about this because he was there precisely to ask the Archbishop for reconciliation. There was a tension inside him that he found difficult to hide. The gentleman agreed with this, confirming Artesia's words. He did not object, although his look betrayed some doubt. Nevertheless, he acknowledged the correctness of her observations. Artesia decided to speak out, saying that this decision seemed extremely unwise. She believed that such steps could only worsen the situation and lead to unpredictable consequences. Even if the Archbishop decides to intervene in the conflict, His Majesty will still have to refuse the reward. This step, in her opinion, will not give the expected results and will not help stabilize the situation. This will not increase the merits of the Western Army in any way, on the contrary. At the moment, awards cannot bring anything useful. The time for such steps has passed, and now other actions are more important. In Artesia's opinion, it was necessary to choose someone who could lead others, who was ready to take responsibility. Only such a leader could cope with the situation. The rest would be outraged if they knew that His Majesty had replaced the real hero with someone completely different, especially at such an important moment as the Victory Day. It would call into question the credibility. The commanders would certainly have felt disillusioned and might have asked to be withdrawn from the Western forces. They were prepared to act, but only if the action was backed by real leadership. Artesia added that His Majesty was very favorably disposed towards her brother Lawrence. This was obvious to everyone, but she saw a certain danger in this because everyone could see his vulnerability. However, Lawrence lacked the support of the nobility, and when the struggle for the throne began, this would become his greatest weakness. Without strong allies, he would be vulnerable, and this could play a decisive role in the future. Cedric did not hide his displeasure at the situation. He admitted that he did regret it, but he could do nothing about it. He felt that his family had a heavy responsibility on their shoulders. Cedric was convinced that he was ideally suited to the role. It would strengthen Lawrence's position and legitimacy. In his claim, he would be entitled to the royal family name and retain power in the north, which would give him a strong position in the west. He added that if he could be restored to health, it would create the necessary impression of support for Lawrence. The emperor could then hand over the west to him, which would ensure stability and strengthen their power. Cedric said that Artesia understood his words and the meaning of the whole situation correctly. He noted that he was well aware of how important it was for Lawrence's future to take certain steps, and they had to be measured and careful. The man stood up and firmly stated that he was not going to make any deals or beg for any concessions. He believed that the soldiers who had served him deserved their share of the reward and did not need any additional promises. He continued to insist that the soldiers had long since earned their privileges and rewards, and there was no need to make them dependent on political maneuvering. These rights were earned with blood and devotion, and they did not require additional conditions. As he began to leave, Artesia stopped him abruptly, asking an unexpected question about the village of the Archduke's conspirators. She asked how he felt about these events and what answer he was going to give. Cedric immediately flared up, deciding that her words sounded like a threat. He looked at her with obvious irritation, perceiving her statement as a provocation. But Artesia remained calm, not intending to move to an open conflict. Artesia calmly replied that her words were not meant as a threat. She simply wanted to give Lawrence advice that could help him avoid any undesirable consequences in the future. Her intentions were pure and had no purpose to intimidate him. Cedric calmed down a little. After hearing her explanation, he realized that Artesia was not trying to pressure him, but was simply offering an outside perspective. Lawrence watched silently, remaining in his own thoughtfulness and not trying to intervene. He remained in the room, and Artesia poured him another cup of tea, continuing to observe his mood. The awkward silence lasted for several moments, but both remained silent, realizing the importance of the decision that was about to follow. Then, Lawrence, after some thought, decided to ask what Artesia really wanted. She calmly replied that His Highness should find a more advantageous solution that would bring more benefit. Lawrence, however, was convinced that the real solution could not be dishonest cooperation for the sake of profit. He had always adhered to the principles of honor, and the idea of compromise did not suit him. Artesia insisted that Lawrence would have to put his principles aside for the sake of his honor, as well as for the well-being of himself and the Western Army, which could be in danger in the near future. None of her relatives, neither her mother nor her brother, even suspected that she had met Lawrence. The whole meeting remained unknown to them, and she continued to act in secret. The breaking of a wheel on a cart was not an accident, but a carefully planned step. It was meant to be the pretext that would create a false impression of what had happened. Everything was organized in such a way that outside observers who might be nearby would think that the situation looked different than it actually was, and was in no way connected with secret plans. Artesia calmly added that it was entirely possible that a woman and a man could meet by chance and fall in love. It was a standard story, and in their case, it could have been just that. She suggested that Lawrence tell everyone that he was giving up any further rivalry with the emperor and was going to return to the capital all out of love for her. Such a move would seem plausible. After that, Artesia specified that the next step for him would be to propose to her. This would be a logical conclusion to their story for everyone who could hear it. Artesia assured that if Lawrence agreed to her proposal and married her, the emperor would not interfere with his further plans, and it would be a safe solution for all parties. Lawrence, hearing her words, turned away and began to think deeply about Artesia's proposal. He weighed all the consequences and possibilities that could arise from making such a decision. His gaze fell on his teacup, and he asked if Artesia thought her plan would protect his ducal status. He doubted that this move would actually bring him the protection he expected. Artesia walked up to him wordlessly, took the cup, and poured him more tea. She was calm, her gaze focused, and she said nothing, leaving Lawrence in thought. Lawrence, having received no answer from her, nevertheless decided to clarify what benefit she herself expected to receive from marriage with him. He wanted to understand what was behind her proposal and what she could gain from this situation. Cedric noted that if Artesia wasn't trying to lure the alliance over to Lawrence's side through her political brother, then he was even more curious about the real reason. All she wants is to get all the property of the Marquis of Rosan and remain independent, and in any case, become an heir. Artesia noted that she was now 18 years old and would only be able to receive the inheritance when she was 20. At the moment, Artesia's mother, who has full control over the Marquis, Rosan's property, will hold this power for the next 2 years. During this period, she will be able to dispose of all the family's assets without restrictions. However, despite her power, she can marry without the prior consent of her guardian, and once the wedding takes place, her status will be changed to that of an adult, a move that will give her freedom. Artesia confirmed these facts, but added that if she simply chose a husband for herself, it would not be enough for her mother. The choice she made must be carefully thought out and agreed upon. She emphasized that her mother would rather kill her fiancé than allow her to marry. So in her opinion, the Duke was the best candidate. His status and position made him a suitable option for this purpose. Lawrence, her brother, asked her if she was going to betray her family for her own purposes. This question was important to him, and he was sure that her actions could affect the fate of the entire family. Artesia calmly replied that she was merely a tool in this situation. She understood that her role was limited, and if someone else used her, it would not be perceived as a betrayal by the people. She explained that if the instrument ends up in the wrong hands, its actions are not considered treason, because everyone understands that this process does not depend on the will of the instrument itself. Artesia said that he, her brother, could protect her if he agreed to enter into a formal marriage with her, even if this union lasted only 2 years. It would be enough to protect her interests. If Lawrence can fulfill this role, she will be willing to support him in the future. He will be able to take a higher position if he fulfills her request, even if it seems difficult and requires sacrifice. If he accepted this offer, Artesia promised to help him become emperor. This was her condition, and she was sure that his position would improve significantly thanks to this union. After these words, Lawrence became very angry. Unable to contain his emotions, he hit her with his mug and asked her if she was offering him betrayal, taking into account her conditions and proposal to marry for political purposes. Artesia stated that the conversation was about the succession to the imperial throne and saw nothing surprising in this. For her, it was a completely natural question given the current situation in the empire. She noted that the emperor had not yet chosen his heir, and that the Duke His Highness could also claim the throne since his rights to the throne were not disputed. According to her, if Lawrence truly wants the people of the Kraitz Empire to live in peace and harmony, he must take responsibility and take the throne. Otherwise, the future of the empire will remain uncertain. Lawrence was a hard man, and his ally Roigar was a man of lust for power. If they were to take the throne, the future of the Kraith's empire would be hard and unstable, for their rule would only lead to destruction. The man could not stand it any longer, and stood up abruptly, saying that he could no longer continue this conversation. His nerves were at their limit, and he was ready to leave without listening to any arguments. Artesia tried to stop him, but he ignored her and began to walk away, clearly irritated. His decision was categorical, and he did not want to discuss the matter any further. Artesia realized that this was not the time to intervene. Lawrence was too tense and not ready for further discussion. It was better to leave him alone and let him sort out his feelings in silence. While she was thinking, a maid came up to her and asked with concern in her voice if everything was all right. She noticed how the atmosphere had changed and the worry on her mistress's face that had appeared after the last scene. Artesia admitted regretfully that she didn't think what was happening was normal. Alice, observing her reaction, added that the man was clearly irritated and left without hiding his anger. This only increased her anxiety. The lady did not answer at once. She stared silently into her cup, obviously absorbed in her thoughts. Her silence was quite natural, since she understood that everything that was happening was quite within the framework of the usual time for this. After a while, the maid spoke again, noting that perhaps it was time to return. After all, quite a lot of time had passed since they arrived, and the situation might require closure. But Artesia, without looking at her, suggested waiting a little. It seemed to her that not everything was finished yet, and there was no need to rush to leave because something important could still happen. The maid, noticing the appearance of the guests, raised her eyebrows in surprise. According to her, the man had already left this place a long time ago, and there was no point in continuing to wait for him. All expectations at this point were in vain. It was already dark outside, and soon Benjamin Connor, a representative of the Western Army, was walking in their direction, appearing as if from the very shadows of the street, his silhouette barely visible in the evening gloom. He conveyed in a measured and clear voice that he was required by Duke Ephon to escort the Lady Marchioness to her home. His voice conveyed a firm conviction that he would carry out the task despite the late hour. As they moved along the dark streets, they were suddenly stopped. One of the strangers passing by made a sign, and it was clear that this was not just a delay, but something much more significant was happening. The driver, watching the situation closely, obediently braked. Artesia immediately felt the tension in the air, because something was clearly going wrong, and her intuition told her that there were problems ahead. One of the men who was conducting the search noticed the Western Army uniform on the man accompanying them. He immediately asked what a representative of this army was doing here on this street. Introducing himself as a knight of the 4th Corps of the Western Army, he said that he had received orders from Duke Rhodes to accompany Lady Marquise Rosanna on her journey. His words sounded firm and convincing. The man, despite the confidence of his interlocutor, was genuinely surprised and doubted the truth of such an important order coming from Archduke Ephon himself. He did not immediately accept it on faith. As he approached the carriage, his gaze immediately fell on the girl, and she recognized him. A slight smile flashed across her face, and she, without hiding her joy, expressed her pleasure at meeting this acquaintance. He asked her a cautious question, trying to find out where she was returning from at such a late hour, and whether it was dangerous for her to be alone. The girl, not hiding her fatigue, replied that she had been in the temple and carried away by prayers, had completely lost track of time. Despite her explanations, the man was left wondering what a person with a Western Army was doing in this place at such a late hour. Then the girl said that her carriage had broken down, and Archduke Ephron happened to be nearby, helped and sent Sir Connor with her. The man, with a warm note in his voice, noted that Mrs. Artesia had already grown up, completely becoming a real lady. His words confused the girl, and a slight blush flashed across her face, betraying timid excitement. He added that he would personally escort her home, after which the soldier from the Western Corps nodded and went about his business. The girl approached Sir Connor with a proposal. If he didn't mind, let him come to her and stay for a cup of tea. The gentleman confidently declared that there was no one safer than a royal guard. Since he had completed his task, he was now allowed to return back. The girl said that she had been given prayer candles at the temple. She would like to give them to the master's daughter, Lady Miel, so that she could light them in the chambers. The man thanked her with all his heart in return. A warm smile appeared on his face, in which one could feel sincere appreciation for her care. She had only hoped to have a little picnic with Lady Miel when she got better. She had planned to take Sir along too, so that they might have more fun. The gentleman remarked that the child had become quite importunate of late, but the lady gently rejected his words, considering it unlikely. Then he smiled again and admitted that it would be wonderful if his remarks turned out to be merely an exaggeration and not the truth. However, the fact that Sir Kishon was nearby could only mean one thing. His Majesty was also somewhere not far from this place. The lady turned to Alice and ordered that the prepared gift bags be distributed to each of the chamberlains serving at the imperial court. All the gifts and decorations that had been prepared in advance had to be thrown away because the situation had changed and they were no longer needed. But the lady remained calm and believed that everything was going as usual. She saw no reason to worry despite the changes. Then one of the maids bowed and expressed that she understood everything. She accepted the order and hastened to carry it out without further questions. The girl asked me to convey that Artesia Malera's daughter had arrived at the palace to personally pay her respects and greet the emperor. The knights strictly indicated that only the back could pass inside to the emperor. Apparently this was a test or a special access code. First, she thanked them for their attention, and then quietly entered the room assigned to her, preparing for the meeting and a little nervous. She suddenly remembered something and wondered if they could let her know if anyone decided to come in while she was inside. The men were surprised by such an unusual question and even asked again. They did not expect that the mistress would suddenly ask about it, breaking the usual order. Artesia noticed that the emperor did not want their meeting to be interrupted by either his mother or anyone else, and so she herself made sure that no one disturbed them. The men caught her mood, and not wanting to spoil the atmosphere, readily agreed to do as she asked, without asking unnecessary questions. Artesia bowed in respect, adding that such a great luminary as the son of the empire had illuminated their humble family home for the first time. She introduced herself as befits etiquette, Artesia, daughter of Malera, and had come only to express her respect and wish her long, peaceful years of life. The emperor noted with some surprise how much the girl had changed during the time they had not seen each other, and how much she had matured in appearance and manners. With a smile, he added that if she were more like her mother, she could be even more beautiful. And Malera, hearing this, admitted with playful pride that she knew she was irresistible. The emperor casually asked how old Artesia would be this year, as if checking how quickly time was passing. The girl answered calmly and with dignity that she was about to turn 18, and her voice sounded confident and calm. The emperor nodded reservedly, noting that she had already become an adult, and it was time to think about a worthy match for a future marriage. But his mother did not share his views. She believed that 18 was too early, and Artesia was not yet ready for serious commitments. The emperor understood what Malera wanted, to keep his daughter with him as long as possible, but he reminded her that by 20, she should at least be engaged. He assured her that he would find her a suitable groom, because it was not reasonable to keep the girl forever close to her brother. She deserved her own path. Artesia nodded gratefully, but at that very moment, one of the guards silently entered the hall, which immediately interrupted the flow of their conversation. Leaning closer, he whispered a short message to Artesia. The man she had been waiting for had arrived. It couldn't be ignored. The emperor, seeing no reason to hold her back, made it clear with a slight movement of his hand that she could be free to go about her business. Artesia politely apologized to everyone, and without losing her dignity, said that she had to leave immediately since they were already waiting for her. The guards reported that Countess Eunice had made a violent scene right at the entrance, clearly trying to get inside and see someone who was especially important to her. The girl only nodded briefly, showing that she wanted to sort out the situation herself, and asked not to interfere anymore. One of the guards, nevertheless, asked whether she knew in advance that the woman would decide to come today without warning. The lady met his gaze calmly, confirming the assumption, with a cold, almost icy expression on her face. She had indeed expected this visit, and so the guards considered her a woman of remarkable insight and strength. The butler began to justify himself, saying that if everything had gone according to the rules, this scene could have been avoided altogether. But the girl no longer understood why, being the daughter of the emperor, she could not simply meet him without obstacles. Artesia came out, and noticing that unusual events were happening in the room, stopped in bewilderment, not understanding what exactly led to such a vivid and stormy reaction of the countess. She could not help but pay attention to what was happening. The countess, unable to restrain herself, suddenly raised her hand and hit the lady hard in the face, not trying to hide her anger and emotions, which seemed unexpected to everyone nearby. Every gesture was full of irritation. Artesia was stunned by such a sudden action. She could not understand how she should react to such an unexpected gesture. Her brain did not have time to comprehend what had happened, and she was lost in search of the next step. Everyone around the maids and the guards were in complete shock, not expecting such violence within these walls, which seemed to be a symbol of order and respect. Surprise gripped everyone. Then the countess even more furiously exclaimed, ordering that Artesia's mother be called immediately. She would not tolerate objections and insisted on her own expressing her impatience and demanding that her will be carried out. Artesia thought that her mother was a woman prone to frivolous actions, and the countess clearly did not understand the full depth of the situation. It was difficult to imagine that what was happening could have shaken her so much. Artesia added that the slap was given in front of witnesses, the court chamberlains who served the emperor. This should have stopped anyone counting on the diplomatic aspect of the situation. The woman could not understand why her actions were so condemned, but Artesia reminded her that the emperor did not tolerate noise and conflict, always striving for peace and order, especially in such important matters. Moreover, What man would like it if his daughter burst in during a secret date and started screaming? Artesia is no longer a baby, just learning to crawl. She is now married and a mother herself, with the responsibilities and experience of an adult woman. She caught an important detail. If she made a scene because of Borya and the shame, it could very well force the emperor to leave his chambers and intervene. Milera, her mother, would have immediately seized the chance. She would have cried demonstratively, ignoring the lady herself, and would have hastened to complain to His Majesty. And the Countess undoubtedly understood what consequences would follow if this scene with the humiliation of Artesia's mother reached the emperor. The angry woman screamed, demanding that the girl behave decently and not forget herself in the presence of her elders. But Artesia noticed that the more rudely the mistress treated her mother, the more obvious it became who was really cruel and unfair. This means that the emperor will involuntarily begin to sympathize with Artesia and her mother, simply by comparing the behavior of both sides. That's why she calmly asked the woman if she was sure she wanted to take things to this point. She flared up with rage, but it didn't lead to a real explosion. Her maid grabbed her hand in time, holding her back. Artesia took advantage of this moment, and holding the woman by the wrist, strongly advised her to return to her place immediately. The countess was amazed. She could not understand how this girl dared to order her a countess of high position. She coldly stated that if Artesia was so confident in herself, then let her try and see how it all ends. But Artesia calmly reminded him that Countess Eunice was nothing more than a noblewoman, and could not compare with the one whom the emperor himself idolized. She is only the daughter of His Majesty, who was recognized out of duty, but not out of great love, and certainly not out of admiration. And if her mother was once displaced, this does not mean that love has disappeared. It has simply now taken a different form. These words frightened the woman a little. She nervously stepped back, looking at the girl with confusion and distrust. Artesia explained that if she began to be perceived as the daughter of the emperor's beloved woman, then memories of this could surface again. And it is she, Artesia, who is able to revive in her father's memory that very connection that he once had with her mother. This means that she can be accepted and loved by her father again if she behaves wisely and with dignity. The woman didn't understand anything. Her gaze was full of incomprehension, as if a crazy but dangerous intriguer stood before her. Artesia quietly made it clear that she would forget this incident and that it would not come up again if no one wanted it to continue. She made it clear that every parent would avoid a situation in which their child would see them with their mistress. And the Countess knew that this was true. The servants were given orders. Countess Eunice was returning to her estate, and their task was to accompany her, ensuring all due respect along the way. Everyone hoped that everything would be fine with Mrs. Artesia, and that no misunderstandings would disturb her peace and authority anymore. The lady reminded him that he should not interfere with His Majesty's leisure time. Such things require tact, and do not allow for arbitrariness. She turned to Countess Eunice and ordered her to go back immediately, reminding her of the respect for her parents that must not be forgotten. The woman was shocked to the depths of her soul to hear such serious words from the lips of a young girl who behaved unexpectedly firmly. The man walked the Countess away, and all this time she kept throwing irritated glances at the girl full of reproach and inner annoyance. Countess Eunice was not a particularly influential woman. Her authority was small, especially compared to more powerful women. Her mother had power and reputation, and Eunice was more of a nuisance whom they tried to get rid of so as not to interfere at court. Her behavior had to be impeccable, otherwise she could incur the emperor's displeasure, which would be disastrous. At that moment, the emperor appeared. He noticed that Charlotte had recently been here, and this immediately attracted his attention. He then looked at Artesia, and realizing the possible awkwardness of the situation, decided to apologize to her for what had happened. Artesia calmly assured that nothing terrible had happened, and showing respect, bowed her head in a polite bow. She added that Countess Eunice, in her grief for her late father, had made a mistake, but she could not be judged harshly for it. However, despite her compassion, Artesia recalled that the Countess had hit her daughter in her own home, and that was difficult to forgive. She admitted that she also grew up without a father, and understands the pain of loss, so she sympathizes with the feelings that Eunice is experiencing. But because of this melancholy, a painful feeling of jealousy towards her mother appeared, the woman who was to become the next mistress. Artesia promised that everything would be in perfect order and that nothing would disturb His Highness's peace. In her opinion, there was absolutely no point in making a fuss over a trifle. The Duke smiled warmly, remembering how he had always respected her desire to appear useful. But he thought Charlotte had been brought up incorrectly. Although she was beautiful, she was too hot-tempered. He couldn't believe that a mother of 3 was acting so frivolously. It was time to be reasonable and not leave marks on the faces of young girls in their prime. He believed that she had the right to ask him for anything she wanted. This would be his gift for her birthday, a sign of respect and gratitude for everything. The girl modestly apologized for being late, and without wasting any time, asked him to accept the gift. She wanted him to appreciate what she had prepared, especially for him. At first, the Emperor did not understand what gift she was talking about. With obvious surprise, he asked again, trying to comprehend what he had heard and find out what exactly she had given him. Artesia explained that the gift was actually meant for her mother. Through this gesture, she wanted to express her gratitude for the life she had been given. It was a pear meant as a symbol for her parents, but since she had no one left to accept the other half, she decided to give it to him. She couldn't look her mother in the eye and give it to her. If he accepted the gift, she would be truly grateful for this important step. The Emperor understood. Since we are talking about parents, the gift must be connected with him and Malera. This aroused his curiosity and certain feelings. Then he asked her if she thought they might not accept such a gift, after which he told her to bring it quickly without delay. When they finally opened the box, the look of surprise on their faces was noticeable. The gift was unexpected and even a little shocking. On a velvet cushion lay a brooch the color of old gold. The Emperor held it out, noting that the thing was amazingly beautiful, a rare work worthy only of the chosen ones. Artesia bowed uncertainly before him, lowering her head. Her gesture was cautious, almost calculated, as if she were trying to guess how best to behave. He noticed her wariness and told her not to be so tense. She raised her head slowly, and despite her efforts to hide her emotions, her fingers trembled treacherously with excitement, betraying her state. The Emperor said in a reserved tone that she was Malera's daughter, and therefore almost like his own. It seemed that in this statement, it was blood that mattered most, rather than any other connection or relationship. Artesia took a deep breath, her voice barely audible, as she said that she was truly honored. Then she bowed again, deeper, something new in the movement, something respectful. The Emperor nodded briefly and added that they must now go to the opera. His words were calm, but there was something in them that suggested the moment was over, as if everything had been decided and the time had come. Malera said, with a slight smile that she had been looking forward to this evening. Artesia remained in her place, clutching the box in her hands. Her gaze directed forward, but her feelings were overwhelming her. Only when the footsteps outside the door had faded did Artesia allow herself to turn around. All this time, she had been standing there as if invisible forces were holding her back, preventing her from taking a single step until the moment for change had arrived. Once upon a time, she dreamed of hearing words from him that would confirm that he considered her his daughter. In her childhood fantasies, this was something incredible, like the fulfillment of her most cherished dream. Now the word family seemed distant and non-existent to her. It was like a beautiful but deceptive fairy tale, from which she had long ago awakened, finding nothing in it but emptiness and deception. Even so, even the fleeting sense of duty that flashed in his gaze was a victory for her. It was the first time he felt he owed her even a little, and it brought her some comfort. At this time, Cedric stood outside the door, deep in thought, looking at the gray, cloudy sky. The wind stirred his cloak restlessly, but he did not move from his place, as if waiting for an answer from the sky itself. He remembered the words of the lady spoken many years ago. In order to give peace to the people of the Empire of Crates, he had to take the throne. He had to do it for them, for their future, to bring peace and tranquility. It had been over 20 years since his parents had been executed. They had been falsely accused of treason, but no one had stood up to defend their name, and that had left a deep wound in Cedric's heart. After that, many came to him, begging him to become a leader, to take the throne to avenge his family, and bring back what was lost. But Cedric would not listen. He did not want to be part of what led to his family's death. Instead of giving in to these requests, He preferred to remain on the sidelines, not interfering in politics. He considered it alien and cruel, and all it brought was destruction and pain to the people. His apparent indifference to politics and neglect of the empire's affairs was not due to laziness. He did it deliberately, as if he were hiding behind a shield to protect his family. She acted differently. Her actions were dictated by concern for the people. Everything she did was neither revenge nor a struggle for survival, but a sincere desire for the common good. And when he became emperor, it was not for the sake of glory or power, but only to make life easier for his subjects, to preserve the country, and to protect its inhabitants from destruction and pain. The morning began with a servant approaching him and carefully noting that it was obvious that the gentleman had not slept a wink all night, and there was weariness in his gaze. To this the gentleman admitted that sleep had indeed not come to him, and the servant, without insisting, simply suggested that he lie down for a while and regain his strength, at least for a short time. However, the gentleman firmly refused. He said that there was no time for this now. An important day was ahead, and he could not afford a minute of rest. Today, he had to go to the palace to meet the daughter of the Marchioness Rosanna again. He wanted to ask her only one question, but for him it was an important one. Meanwhile, Archduke Cedric asked for a personal audience with His Majesty. He did not dare to enter without permission, without an invitation. The emperor was a little surprised to hear who exactly was asking for a meeting. But without delay, he ordered Cedric to be led in immediately, without making him wait at the door. The doors creaked open, and Cedric walked into the room. His steps were calm, but every movement spoke of an inner determination and anxiety hidden behind the outer restraint. The emperor gestured to a seat nearby and invited Cedric to come closer. He explained that he was taking a short break and was willing to listen to him at his own pace in a calm environment. Cedric, coming closer, immediately apologized. Feeling a little awkward, he did not want to disturb the emperor's peace, but considered his request important enough to put all other matters aside. He added that if he had known that Countess Eunice was present, he would certainly not have disturbed the emperor, even if the matter had been urgent. He respected the importance of her presence and would have preferred to wait. The emperor, smiling, asked with unexpected kindness why Cedric looked so gloomy. He noticed that he had always been more lively and open, and now it was much more noticeable. He reminded them that Charlotte was his daughter, and Cedric was his nephew, and they were all essentially one family. They were connected not only by blood, but also by fate, and their relationship should be strong and trusting. It was hard for Cedric to hear such words, because it was this man who had once accused his parents of treason and sentenced them to death. The weight of that tragedy was still in his memory. The emperor, continuing the conversation, expressed confidence that the relationship between Cedric and his cousin would work out well, just as his own relationship with Artisia had. He believed that there would be no problems. Cedric, a little surprised, asked if it was about Lady Rosanna. He could not understand why such assumptions were made. The emperor, confirming his guess, noted that he himself had recently introduced the knight to Rosanna, so that he would take her home. Everything was going according to plan. The duke said that there was nothing special about it. He noted that the emperor was probably already aware of all the events since they had met by chance in the temple, and she had no knight. The emperor added that he had recently arrived from the outskirts of the capital, and now he would like to state that his current visit was completely unrelated to Lady Rosanna. The duke did not respond to this, but continued to watch what was happening attentively. The emperor looked somewhat tense, as if he was hiding something. At this point, the emperor laughed and slapped him cheerfully on the knee. He couldn't help but notice that sometimes the emperor's honesty was almost frightening. The duke, supporting the emperor, said that if the meeting took place today, it would be wonderful. He was glad of such an opportunity, despite all the difficulties. He also said that he had come here not because of Lady Rosanna, but about the Western Army. This topic was much more important to him and required immediate discussion. The emperor, interrupting him abruptly, asked him if he understood why the emperor had decided to receive him here at this particular moment and not in his office. The question was unexpected and direct. The duke stood there a little confused, not knowing why the emperor had reacted like that. He had not expected such a turn of events and could not understand what could have caused such a reaction. The emperor, after some time, said with a smile that it was not worth discussing important matters in the presence of the family because such conversations required a special mood and privacy to make the right decisions. He suggested postponing the discussion for 3 days when everyone could gather in more suitable conditions. This was important in order to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings and omissions. The emperor added with a slight smile that there was no need to worry about him forgetting the contribution of the Western Army, since this event had already been discussed and carefully thought out more than once. Then he himself served Cedric's tea, pouring it with the care and delicacy befitting one who was mindful of the importance of these little things in conversation. It was his usual gesture of attention. The Emperor's Majesty was clearly altered after he learned of his meeting with Lady Rosanna. This moment left a mark on him that affected his behavior and attitude towards others. At Rosanne's estate, Cedric was met by a servant who greeted him politely, showing his willingness to help and serve as his position in that house required. Cedric inquired where the lady had gone, and the servant informed him that she seemed to have gone about her business. He himself was not sure of the exact route, but he could point out a possible direction. After a while, another maid confirmed that Lady Rosanne had gone to the beam to see Count Ender. This was an important event, as everyone present understood that the meeting with the Count carried considerable weight. The servant immediately apologized to the Duke and offered to return the misses, immediately if he would allow time for it. He was ready to clear up the misunderstanding by quickly completing his task. Cedric looked at him with bewilderment and asked if his position in Rosanne's house was really higher than the lady herself. This was an unexpected moment for him, which made him think about his full status. The man was surprised by such a question and asked Cedric what he meant. He was sure that all the positions in the house were clearly distributed, and such questions should not arise. Cedric explained that the Marquis's daughter Rose was the heir to the estate, and that was a fact that was beyond doubt, and he in turn had no right to tell her what to do in this house. Cedric added that as a butler, he could only observe order and not interfere in matters that concerned Rosanne herself. This was an important adjustment in his approach to matters of power. The servant bowed and stated that he had only thought that as young Lawrence would soon return, it might be appropriate to have a little chat with him before the missus came in. He was perplexed at his mistake. Then, Cedric, realizing the situation, said that this could mean he had made a mistake. He wanted to emphasize that everything had to be done in order, and there was no point in rushing into decisions before the lady arrived. Cedric paused and added that he had probably misjudged in thinking that the butler in Rosanne's house was someone else. He saw that there was a misunderstanding and tried to clear it up. He suggested that the man the butler was talking to might in fact be Lord Lawrence's butler rather than the owner of Rosanne's estate. This opened up a new perspective to their conversation and made things more confusing. The butler, realizing his mistake, immediately began to apologize, bowing to Cedric, and tried to correct his behavior, realizing that his place in the house must remain clearly defined and subject to higher orders. Then the gentleman, remembering the conversation with Artisia, realized that she had long planned to receive all the property of the Marquise of Rosanne. She strove for independence, and now it became clear she had asked him to protect her by marrying her legally for 2 years. That had been her condition, and now he realized why she had suggested it. She was clearly up to something. Now that he thought about it, he understood why she had asked for his protection. At this time, everyone at Count Ender's estate continued to have fun, but Our Lady remained on the sidelines. While others were enjoying the dancing and conversation, the lady stood alone, absorbed in her thoughts. She was not part of this fun and kept away from everyone. At one point, a young girl approached her, interested in her condition, and asked why the Marchioness looked so sad. Lady Rosanna was a little surprised, but did not answer right away. The Marchioness, turning around, realized that Lady Ardia the Countess stood before her. She recognized her by her manners, but did not expect to meet her at such a moment. It was difficult to answer, but she nevertheless began the conversation. Artia noticed that the Marquise had arrived at the ball earlier than the others, but had still not danced with any man. This did not escape her attention, and she noted this fact with a smile. Artesia quietly remarked that someone had to stand back, decorate the walls, and watch the proceedings. The Countess smiled, understanding her words, but added that she might be exaggerating. She continued that her words sounded as if they brought her sadness. All the men in the room seemed callous and without manners, which really could not help but upset the lady. But suddenly, the Countess smiled sharply and added that perhaps Lady Rosanna herself was partly to blame for this. Her words, despite all the irony, were not without meaning. The Countess pointed out that if Lady Rosanna came to the ball in a dress she had already worn 4 times, she could not expect any special attention from the gentlemen. They might not even notice that this was not her first appearance in this outfit. She noticed that men would definitely not be able to tell whether they had danced with her at this ball or the last one. Such a repeat of the outfit could not help but cause doubts, and perhaps even disappointment. After her words, everyone present began to laugh, but the lady did not find it funny. Her gaze remained serious, and she continued to stand aside, not sharing the general merriment. The men observing the situation realized that the Marquise had indeed worn the same dress for the 4th time. This gave them a reason to laugh, and everyone began to look at each other, noticing her outfit. Laughter echoed throughout the room, and the girl watching the proceedings could not help but notice how loudly everyone was laughing. The lady stood among them, but her face did not show the slightest trace of a smile. After that, Artesia smiled, noting that it didn't matter how much the dress cost, if it was a waste of several 100,000 gold coins. After all, with her ugly appearance, such an outfit could not make her more beautiful. The girl Artesia also added that she especially liked the embroidery on this dress. Although she would venture to guess that it was from the Southern Kingdom, the style was unique and different from the others. She believed that such exquisite dresses should be worn only by well-bred ladies like herself. Otherwise, the designer's work would simply be devalued. It was a special pride for those who wore such dresses. Then Mrs. Artia, smiling, noted that Artesia was very perceptive and emphasized her attentiveness. Her perception of the surrounding world was at its best, as was her ability to notice details. Artesia became curious and asked if everything was really that good. She expected to hear an answer that would dispel her doubts or confirm her opinion, but her curiosity was not immediately satisfied. Mrs. Artia immediately understood what Artesia was talking about and asked again what exactly she meant. Understanding flashed in her eyes, and she was ready to explain everything that might interest the girl. Artesia explained that embroidery made from Jan's velvet was so expensive that if she used it generously, the cost of the fabric alone could be a fortune. It was a very luxurious and rare choice. From what she had seen, this was the 4th dress embroidered with this material. The dress was gorgeous but extremely expensive, and it was obvious that the cost of one such piece could compete with entire fortunes. If this was true, then Count Artia apparently spent almost half of his estate's annual income on just one dress for his lady. This was too noticeable and caused surprise among those around him. After these words, the Countess was completely horrified and asked again what exactly was being discussed. She could not believe that such large-scale expenses were being discussed, and her surprise was completely justified. Then the lady, smiling, added that the Count and Countess must have loved me very much, since they had not told her the cost of these dresses. This was a subtle hint at the hidden care and attention they paid to her outfits. There must have been a deep affection behind it all, otherwise no one would have been able to afford such large expenditures on clothing. The lady casually mentioned how much they valued her without focusing on her reaction. The Count's main source of income was the marble mining business. However, over time, it was threatened with closure. In a year or two, it will most likely cease to exist due to a sharp reduction in capital. The profit margin had dropped significantly, and they were now on the verge of bankruptcy. The Countess was aware of this and apparently expected the worst outcome as the situation looked critical. It was a bitter truth. The money they kept spending seemed like a waste of money that wasn't worth it. Everyone saw the situation getting worse and knew it would only get worse. However, the lady noted that if this was an investment in the future of the family, then the amount was not really that big. Perhaps this was not the end, but only temporary difficulties that had to be endured. She added with a smile that with such beauty, The Countess would certainly justify all her parents' expectations. These words were supposed to encourage the girl, but there was something insincere and somewhat overly pompous in them. The Countess exploded in rage, believing that the Marquise was hinting that her parents might sell her. This caused a storm of emotions, and she was unable to hide her irritation, which attracted the attention of those around her. The Countess's anger was so strong that she could not contain herself. All eyes were on her, and her bright reaction attracted even more attention. The entire hall felt the tensions. At that moment, the door opened, and someone entered the room. The question immediately arose as to why he had suddenly decided to show up, since his appearance was unexpected for everyone present. It was Archduke Ephron. His Majesty entered the hall with a noble air, attracting everyone's attention. Everyone in the room immediately realized that his appearance was not accidental, and they became interested in who he was and why he had come. Everyone began to bow to him. The Countess, noticing him, was confused because the Archduke was unusually handsome. Her face turned red from embarrassment, and the attention of the entire hall was focused on him. Archduke Ephron greeted the Countess, and then the mother of the girl with whom the Marquise was arguing. His manners were polite and dignified, which further increased the interest of all present. Everyone was talking with curiosity, because they were wondering why he had come. Rumors were going around that His Majesty was not very fond of women, and everyone was waiting for his presence to explain everything. They assumed that someone present might have been acquainted with His Majesty. However, no one knew for sure the reason for his visit, and this only added to the mystery of the whole situation. The Archduke walked towards the Marquise and Countess. The Countess, a little embarrassed, greeted him joyfully. Although her inner excitement was obvious, she was ready to do anything to attract his attention. She bowed, but the Archduke passed her without paying any attention. It was unexpected, and she felt her heart clench. It seemed she had become insignificant in his presence. Everyone was shocked when they realized that the Archduke was heading towards the Marchioness Rosanna's daughter. This unexpected reaction caused shock among those present. No one expected that his interest would be focused on her. The Archduke came closer and greeted the girl with a smile. His greeting was friendly, but there was something more hidden in it. Everyone noticed that some special understanding had arisen between them. He offered her his hand, and the girl took it with understanding. It was obvious that she could not hide her confusion, but her gaze expressed interest. She was truly puzzled by what was happening. Timidly, she gave him her hand and asked him what had brought him here. This question was not accidental. The girl could not understand what exactly had caused such a sudden and strange visit from the Archduke. Artia was horrified. Everything that was happening was a complete surprise to her. She felt gossip floating around her, and every minute became more tense and difficult to understand. The Duke looked at the girl carefully, then carefully turned her face towards him, trying to see her expression. He couldn't understand what was wrong with her appearance. It surprised him. The lady looking up could not understand what exactly he was talking about. She was not able to immediately understand what could have caused such a reaction in him, because at first glance, everything seemed normal. The Duke, noticing the changes on her face, immediately noticed that her cheek looked swollen, and there were nail marks on her skin. He also saw that the corner of her lips was injured, which made him uneasy. After these remarks, the Marquise lowered her head, hiding her face from his gaze, as if she was worried that the Duke had noticed her condition. It seemed awkward and painful to her, and her silence spoke of her embarrassment. She did not answer him, and this made the Duke fall silent, leaving room for thought. He felt that her silence only increased the tension in the room, and he did not know what to say next. Coming closer, the Duke asked her if these traces were really left by Countess Eunice. He met her today at the palace. They got to talking, and she conveyed to him her apologies for the Marchioness, but everything was not so simple. He explained that Countess Eunice had asked him to convey her apologies for what had happened, but all of this seemed insignificant to Artesia in light of what was happening in her life at the time. Artesia, holding back her irritation, asked him not to talk nonsense because she already had serious problems waiting for her. Her situation was too complicated to waste time on useless talk about apologies. Turning around, the Duke said that he now had to go back. His words did not cause any objections from the Marquise, and she only nodded, showing that she agreed with his decision. He turned back and looked again at Countess Artia, who stood nearby, quietly waiting. The Countess, with a sweet and open face, addressed the Duke. Her words attracted his attention. The Countess, smiling modestly, apologized to the Duke for her unexpected behavior, explaining that she was from the county of Artia. This gave her a certain elegance, but she was clearly not one to be accustomed to excessive attention. She remarked that it was not proper for a gentleman to come to a ball and then leave without dancing at least one part, especially if there was a lady at the ball who could not dance a single dance. Cedric, hearing her words, looked at Artesia and then turned his gaze to the Countess. He could have ignored it, but her remarks caught his attention. Interest flickered in his eyes, but he left the question open. He thought for a moment and told her that he agreed that a gentleman should behave differently, especially when there was a lady nearby who for some reason could not take part in the dance. This left a special impression. After that, Cedric turned to Artesia and then turned back to the Countess. He was clearly interested in her answer. Although he did not express it openly, his gaze was full of thought and a slight mystery. He asked her if she was a friend of Lady Marquise Rosanna. This was quite unexpected for the girl, and her reaction to this question was full of surprise. She did not expect such a direct question. The Countess smiled and confirmed that it was indeed, so she was a friend of the Marchioness Rosanna. The answer was simple, but its sincerity and slight smile made her more accessible and open in the eyes of the interlocutor. Then the Duke, casting a glance at her, remarked that, in his opinion, the most important duty of a gentleman was to take care of a lady, especially in awkward situations. He wanted to clarify that if she really was Rosanna's friend, she should be concerned. He wanted to make sure that she was really the Marquise's friend, because if she was, then her behavior should be a little different. He hoped that she was not just watching, but also felt responsible. The Countess, clearly puzzled by the question, asked him again, not understanding how exactly she should react to such a remark. It confused her, and she felt a little uncomfortable. The Duke, noticing her surprise, replied that if she really was the Marquise's friend, she should be worried, not just watching what was happening. He said this with slight irony, not hiding his opinion. Artesia was shocked by what was happening around her. The air was filled with a chaotic noise, and everyone began to fuss, drawing attention to themselves. The girl felt a nervous tension grip her. In a panic, she grabbed the hand of the gentleman who was next to her and felt his palm wrapped tightly around hers. Although Artesia looked incredibly beautiful, her face was haggard. It became obvious that she was not receiving the proper care, which greatly affected her appearance. For the ball, she chose the same dress as for yesterday's walk. This outfit, although beautiful, was clearly not suitable for such an important event. Her wrist was so fragile that looking at it, one could see the line of fate as if on a thin, barely noticeable stick. She was absolutely not like the heiress of the Marchioness Rosanna. There was nothing in her image that could inspire respect and trust. He was even afraid to imagine how they really treated her in her house, if they allowed themselves such disdain. That's why he decided to turn to Lady Rosanna, which surprised her greatly. This gesture was unexpected for everyone who was nearby. He asked if he could invite her to a dance performance. It seemed that his request was sincere, and he did not expect a refusal. When the Countess heard that the Duke was offering to dance not with her, but with the Marquise, she was absolutely horrified. Such behavior was unacceptable to her. Artesia remained silent at first and lowered her head. A light cloud of doubt flashed through her thoughts. She did not know what to do. The whole room was in shock. His Majesty was going to dance. And what's most surprising with this girl who didn't fit into this world at all? Artesia quietly told him that she didn't want to attract too much attention, and so she tried to back away, but she felt inside that she shouldn't do that. The Duke said she had already attracted attention, so she had nothing to lose. He added that her reserve only increased the interest. He also noted that there was no need to worry because he was an archduke and was quite capable of being a good companion for her in dance. The Duke insisted on his own, and gradually, the lady began to think he was so persistent that she could hardly resist his request. She finally agreed and extended her hand to him, saying that she might accidentally step on his foot as she was not an experienced dancer. All this happened because she never took dance lessons, and her skills in this matter were far from perfect. The Duke said that in that case, they would be able to forgive each other generously, despite all the misunderstandings and disagreements that had arisen in their relationship. This would be an important step for both parties. He admitted that he himself could not dance, and said this in order to support her, because he noticed that she was a little nervous. His words were supposed to dispel her doubts a little and help her relax. Within moments, they were both engrossed in the dance, moving smoothly around the room. Their movements merged into one, creating an elegant and harmonious picture, attracting the attention of those around them. The entire room watched them attentively, unable to tear their eyes away from the way they danced together. Even the most experienced dancers could not help but notice how well they harmonized with each other in this moment. Everyone was shocked. Such a combination of grace and confidence seemed rare. Plus, they looked so harmonious that anyone would think they were a couple who had been dancing together all their lives. As Cedric danced with her, a genuine smile lit up his face. He was clearly enjoying the moment, feeling comfortable and happy that he was able to share such a special moment with her. The lady looked into his eyes silently. Her gaze was confident and calm. Her green eyes seemed to sparkle as if trying to convey all her thoughts without words, maintaining mystery in this dance. Everything around them seemed to disappear, and only the two of them remained in the empty ballroom. At that moment, the whole world seemed to shrink to their movement, and all attention was focused on their dance, creating an atmosphere of privacy. It was different last time. They had danced together before, but the atmosphere was different. It was at a different point in their lives, and there was a different energy between them now. Cedric noticed that last time he thought she couldn't dance, as he had never seen her dance. This observation made him a little surprised, because she did much better than he expected. The lady, in turn, noticed that he himself was not dancing. Her gaze was intense, and she could not help but emphasize that it was he who was avoiding dancing at that moment. She noted this with a slight ironic smile. The gentleman reminded her that he had a favor to ask, which was why he had asked her to dance. It was more than just a polite gesture, and his intentions behind the invitation did not escape her notice. She replied that he could speak, because now all attention was on them, and no one was distracted. The lady did not hide her interest and willingness to listen, although her eyes were full of questions expecting further explanation. Then he said that she should take care of Licia. His request was direct and clear, but its meaning remained unclear. Why she should take on this responsibility was a mystery to her. Artisia was surprised, and without hiding, her curiosity asked him why he was addressing such a request to her. The question was sincere, and her bewilderment at that moment was quite natural. The gentleman replied that he could not trust Lawrence, and for this reason asked her to help him resolve the matter. He looked to her for support, knowing that her judgments would be objective and fair. At that moment, Artisia began to understand that he simply trusted her. This discovery changed her perception of the whole situation a little, and she felt that his request was not so much about trust, but about faith in her abilities. But the Duke, realizing the complexity of the situation, added that he knew of her efforts to legitimize Lawrence. He said this with a slight shadow of doubt, because she really did try to do everything possible to get Licia to marry him. In the end, he noticed that whatever her attitude toward Licia was, it was her decision. No matter how difficult it was, the whole truth was contained in Licia's decision, and no one could influence her choice. The Duke realized that there was nothing more to say and fell silent. He watched the situation carefully, but his words no longer found a response in this conversation. Thoughtfulness was visible in his eyes. For him, this girl was more than just an acquaintance or a subject. He saw her as a younger sister whom he wanted to protect and defend from all troubles. The Duke frankly admitted that he was ready to do everything possible to keep not only the Empire safe, but also Licia and everything connected with it. This was the most important task for him. Artisia asked in surprise how she should act in order to pretend that she had not heard his words. The Duke's words caused her some confusion. All this reminded her of the events of the past days, when everything developed according to a similar scenario, and she had already witnessed similar conversations more than once. Of course, nothing happened, and they were left where they started. Moments that seemed important had no real consequences. At that moment, unexpectedly, for everyone, the lady accidentally stepped on his foot, and this caused an instant shift in her balance. She began to fall, which immediately attracted the attention of everyone around. Artesia panicked as she realized she was about to fall, and her heart pounded with fear. Everything was happening too fast for her to do anything. But to her great relief, the gentleman managed to grab her hand, preventing her from falling. It was like a moment of tension, but everything turned out okay. At this moment, both of them sparkled, and their gazes intertwined. Everyone around held their breath for a moment, watching this exquisite scene. The entire congregation was in complete shock. They couldn't believe that this had happened. They began to applaud, delighted by what they had just witnessed. No one knew that His Highness danced so skillfully. The couple looked amazing together, and everyone was surprised at how harmoniously they looked in this dance. Then the gentleman, with a light remark, noted that his dancing skills were perhaps slightly superior to hers. His words were full of lightness and self-irony. The girl replied with a smile that it was difficult to compare her dancing skills with those of such an outstanding dancer as His Highness. These words made him smile, and a slight irony appeared on his face. He laughed quietly, and his eyes showed genuine merriment. After a few moments, his smile turned into a loud laugh. He couldn't contain the cheerful mood that came over him at that moment. Soon he escorted her to the carriage. This moment ended their meeting, leaving pleasant impressions and a slight feeling that something important had happened between them. The girl was very grateful to him. She could not help but express her gratitude for his help and support, especially at a time when everything could have turned out differently. He also noticed that he didn't quite understand what she was thanking him for. Everything seemed simple and natural to him, and he was genuinely surprised by her words. Then the lady noticed that she had to thank him for the dance he had given her. She expressed her gratitude for his attention and care, noting how pleasant it was for her. The gentleman responded by modestly noting that his action was the usual duty of a gentleman. He considered it nothing special and was simply following the rules of etiquette. The girl stated that she understood that he really wanted to protect her reputation with Lady Countess Artia. She appreciated his intentions, although she hid her thoughts. The man smiled and said that it was not a big deal for him because everything he did was just a small thing compared to what he would be willing to do for her. When the lady slightly inclined her head and seemed about to say something, she suddenly fell silent, thinking something important flashed in her eyes, which she decided to bring up for discussion. Soon she became bold and asked if she could ask him for another favor. The gentleman immediately replied that he was ready to listen to her request and was waiting for her answer with curiosity. She admitted that she wanted him to go with her to Levgar. She was serious, expecting him to respond to her request with interest rather than bewilderment. The man was a little surprised and asked what exactly she meant. He didn't know what Levgar was and didn't understand why she wanted to visit this place, known for its unsafe reputation. The girl explained that she needed to meet a certain person at this place. She did not reveal all the details, but his bewilderment was quite justified in her eyes. As they drove in that direction, she decided to ask him his opinion about her proposal. She hoped he would answer, but she doubted how he would take her request. The man, after thinking for a moment, said that if she meant that he would keep their truth for 2 years, then she could fully count on his help and promises. The girl confirmed his words with surprise. Her gaze filled with questions, and she looked at him with admiration, realizing that he was ready to take such serious steps for her. He stopped and said that before he could give a final answer, he needed to ask her one more important question, which she had to answer honestly and openly. He asked her why she was so insistent on breaking up after 2 years. Her motives were important to him, and he waited for her explanation, curious about her inner experiences. She did not expect such a question, but having collected her thoughts, she answered him that her decision was connected with certain circumstances that she could not ignore. The reason why she could not stay with him any longer was that Her Highness Cedric would fall in love again with Saint Lycia, whose beauty was comparable to a blooming rose. Artesia did not want Her Highness to become the subject of rumors and accusations. She feared that he would be labeled as someone who had given up on love and found a new passion. The man was surprised by her answer and noted that he had not expected such a view of the situation. He saw her feelings, but did not understand how this was related to her decision. The lady noted with restraint that there was nothing to hide, but at the same time, she did not want to become an empress, realizing that her path lay in a different direction. She didn't feel qualified for the role, though perhaps he saw her hesitation as moral compulsion. It was a strange feeling, but she couldn't shake the idea that she wasn't cut out for the job. The gentleman noticed that she seemed to be not alien to the desire to sacrifice herself for the good of the Empire. His words sounded soft but did not hide the seriousness of his intentions, as if he understood the full weight of her determination. The girl lowered her eyes, not answering him. There was much unsaid in her silence. She felt how heavy this responsibility was, and she did not know what else could be said to justify her feelings. Then the gentleman added that he had one more condition. His words were clear, but there was still a certain threat, as if he was expecting something ready to offer a solution that would change everything. He couldn't stand it when people around him suffered or faced injustice. This trait of his character was well known, and now it became the key to their conversation. He could not remain indifferent. In case she decided to be near him, she had to remember this rule. His voice was calm, but there was a clear confidence in it, and he wanted her to understand the importance of her actions. The lady said she understood his words, but he noticed that her answer sounded somewhat vague. He wanted her to understand that it was not only about harming others, but also about not harming oneself. She had to learn to prevent troubles, not to let anything bad happen to her or her loved ones. These words were important, and there was a hidden concern for her well-being. The best thing he said was if she could stand up for herself, fight back when the situation called for it. His words were convincing, and they made her think about how she perceived her powers and capabilities. He was serious, and this attitude of his surprised her. She had not expected such a frank approach from him, because his outlook on life had always seemed less insistent to her. His concern was different than she thought. After these words, the lady laughed, and the gentleman felt that her laughter seemed to relieve tension. He understood that she took it differently, but her laughter was light and carefree, which meant her trust. She smiled, thanking him for his concern, and His Highness smiled back. There was sincerity in her words, and her eyes were full of gratitude, although inside she was still thinking about what she had said. After some time, they arrived at the place. Everything was quiet around, and despite the excitement, the atmosphere seemed calm. She felt that everything was happening for a reason, that their path was predetermined. He helped her down, but suddenly picked her up in his arms. It was a gesture she hadn't expected, but his strength and confidence in the movement seemed like a genuine gesture of care. The mood, of course, was such that she could not help but notice the change in his actions. He noticed that he had not ceased to show nobility, although to her it looked more like an attempt to make her path easier. Her heart began to beat faster when she felt his strong arms around her. The unexpected attention and this closeness made her feelings conflicting, and she began to feel a thrill. Suddenly, they heard voices, beggars asking for alms. Their calls were ordinary, but at this moment they seemed too intrusive, interrupting the silence and calm. The beggars ran up to them, pounced on them, with requests for alms. This unexpected step was unpleasant for her, but she was already accustomed to such encounters and did not show emotions. She was prepared for the fact that not everything would be as she expected. These people, beggars, did not cause her any surprise or pity, and she remained cold and indifferent to what was happening. Everyone was begging, but the lady stood silently and did not react. Her silence was like a barrier between her and the world around her. She could not allow herself to be immersed in it. When the maid brought her a cloak to cover her and change her appearance, the mistress accepted it without a word. It was simply a gesture necessary to hide and not attract attention. The gentleman assumed that she always prepared such clothes for herself in advance, because her appearance was always thought out to the smallest detail. However, he could not help but notice that she had not planned to come here. The lady noticed that her hair attracted attention. It was obvious because her light locks immediately attracted glances, creating a certain feeling of uniqueness and emphasizing her image. As they approached the carriage, the coachman began to push them away with hostility. His actions clearly expressed a desire to leave them aside, and he tried to push them away as if they were unwelcome guests. The Duke, noticing this, looked at the coachmen, and they in turn did not take their eyes off him like angry dogs. In their gaze, one could feel displeasure, and he clearly sensed their hostility. The gentleman made it clear that it was time to move on, His voice was decisive, and his words left no doubt. It was time to continue on the path despite all the obstacles. On the way, Cedric, unable to bear the silence, became interested in who the girl was going to meet. The question was innocent, but his interest was sincere, and he waited for the answer with curiosity. The girl replied that she had a meeting with the butler, which surprised him greatly. This confession came as a surprise to him, as he did not expect that a meeting with this man could be so important. The lady could not help but notice that Cedric's ancestors had served in Rosan's family for many generations. However, after the death of the Marquise, he was dismissed, and now such relations became part of the past. She also added that now she had absolutely no one to trust. This feeling of loneliness was difficult for her, and she could not find support among those who were close to her. Cedric held a grudge against both her mother and herself, but his family had always been tied to the service of the Marquis of Rosan, and for generations his ancestors had carried out their work with loyalty and honor. Batman, confident in the power of the blood that was passed down to him by inheritance, decided that he had to visit this man. He believed that his origins could play an important role in what was happening. The butler of the Rosan family was a member of the old aristocracy, and his family was distinguished by wealth and strong traditions. His place in society was unquestioned, but life had changed. But now this butler found himself in such a terrible place that it was impossible not to feel compassion. His situation looked sad, and everything testified to his downfall. After some time, they reached his house and even entered the institute itself. This place was familiar to him, but now it became so alien that he felt something completely new. Seeing strangers in front of him, he was afraid. The fear of not knowing who they were and what they wanted overwhelmed him, but he tried to hide his emotions and not show weakness. He said he was curious about what had brought these distinguished guests to his home. There was genuine curiosity in his words, and his eyes were searching for answers to the questions that tormented him. The girl asked if Mr. Hanson could have some time to talk. She wasn't sure how he would react, but she hoped he would understand. The gentleman was surprised to hear this request. He said that he would return soon, and perhaps he could help, but his time was limited. His words sounded a little uncertain. This place they found themselves in was not his home. In fact, it was some bar where he worked as a cleaner. This place clearly did not match his status and surroundings. He tried to calm the girl down, saying that they were unlikely to kill him, so there was no need to worry. All they needed was a little time to figure out the situation. When they got outside, he admitted that maybe it wasn't the best option. Getting them somewhere tidy was pretty hard, especially when you were a laborer. Despite all the difficulties, he could not understand why Duke Ephron came to him. It was all too strange, and he could not find an explanation for it. Despite his expulsion, the Hanson family had cared for Rosan's bloodline for generations. He could not divulge any of the family's secrets despite their difficulties. The gentleman said that he was just a bodyguard for the lady, and that one should not expect any great privileges or information from him. He did his job, but nothing more. He looked closely at the girl, who at that moment took off her hood. Everything suddenly became clear, and his gaze was full of surprise when he recognized her. At that moment, he recognized that hair, and immediately realized that it was none other than Mrs. Rosan in front of him. Remembering her face, he involuntarily felt a certain uneasiness. She was rather cold in her communication, but she still greeted him, telling him her name. His wariness only increased because she obviously knew more about him than he assumed. He suddenly realized who she really was. She was the daughter of Milaira, the woman who had brought about the destruction of the Rosan family. This revelation left him confused. He said that she bore a striking resemblance to Mr. Mahayal, but there was irritation and anger in his words that could not be hidden. The lady noticed that he was the first to address her as a young marchioness, which could not but surprise her. She was accustomed to a different attitude, and his words left a strange feeling. The man asked if her mother knew she was there, and the girl replied that if her mother had known, she would never have allowed her to come. She felt that the decision was her own. His face was full of anger as he asked the young lady if she knew what her mother had done to make this happen. His question sounded like an accusation full of indignation and resentment. Artisia looked down, realizing the gravity of the situation. She replied that she was well aware of what had happened. a clear admission of her role in the events they had discussed. She added that her mother had poisoned all the direct heirs of the Marquis of Rosan, and this was her cruel move to eliminate everyone who could claim the title and inheritance so that Artesia would become the sole heir. The girl continued that her mother had blamed the Hansen family for the crime, and thus her plan was hidden behind lies and manipulation. It was a game in which Artesia was a pawn. She explained that her mother had done all this so that Artesia could become the sole heir of the Marquis of Rosan. Her words carried the weight of the knowledge that her life had been part of a larger political conspiracy. When the Duke heard these words, he was stunned. His face expressed complete surprise and shock. He could not believe that such events could take place in their world, and it left a deep mark on his soul. Remembering his daughter's words, the butler became even more angry. He remembered her telling her father that if they did not take the necessary measures, they would all be killed. This remained in his memory forever. But he didn't agree with that. He had evidence against the Marquise, and he believed that this evidence could be decisive despite her tricks and manipulations. But his daughter said that even if he could prove Malerta guilty, they would still be in mortal danger. It was a hard confession, but she was convinced he was right. She added that no one would protect them because the relatives of the Marquis of Rosan would not interfere. She did not believe that they could count on help since everyone was involved in this murky business. The daughter explained that all of the Marquis' relatives were blinded by greed and the desire to obtain their share of the inheritance, which significantly limited their ability to act honestly and openly. The father was firm in his opinion, believing that despite all the difficulties, he should not pretend that he did not understand what was happening. He was ready to fight, not hiding his awareness of what was happening around him. The identity of the killer was obvious, but despite this, everyone knew that the truth remained hidden. The future hung on this, and the consequences were unclear. Only she, the heiress, could decide what to do next. The father, understanding the gravity of the situation, was sure that revealing the truth would only do harm. He thought that his daughter would not appreciate his honesty and would not be grateful for his frankness. The important thing was that his actions would inevitably lead to a conflict with Artesia's mother. She could perceive this as a threat and become his enemy, and this was a risk that he did not know how to cope with. The daughter expressed her point of view. He must understand what this would lead to, otherwise there would be problems. But he could not hide his confusion and asked her to gather everyone to resolve this issue. In response to her request, he suggested that from now on, they hide their real name. It was not easy, but in his opinion, there was no other way. They had to forget everything about their work and life under the Rosan Marquises. It was the only way to protect themselves and have any chance of survival. He told his family about it, expecting that everyone would understand the importance of his words. However, despite the warnings, he himself could not act as he advised his husband. This decision did not leave him indifferent, but even so, despite his desire to maintain the status quo, he could not resist. He knew that the future was too uncertain, and those around him would not be able to avoid fear and doubt. Roth Hansen remained true to his principles. He was proud of his name, despite all the trials and tribulations. Still, he knew that one day the Marquise would be able to find him. And then, when his life already seemed doomed, he thought more and more that if the Marquise had ever found him, he would not have escaped his fate. It was inevitable despite his efforts. Then the butler, having made a decision, decided to take an unexpected step. He asked the young girl why she was looking for him at all. This was important to him because the question remained unanswered. Artesia, without losing her composure, said that before she could answer, she had to offer him a sincere apology. She understood how important it was to him, and she was ready to admit her mistakes. The man was extremely surprised by this answer. He did not expect to hear such words, and did not even know how to react correctly. It was an unexpected reaction, and it took him a while to understand its motives. The girl said that she was not her mother's daughter, and these words sounded quite unexpected. What she said stirred up a lot of emotions in the person who listened to her. She specified that she belonged to the last descendant of the Rosan family because her ancestors were unable to protect their subjects, which turned out to be a heavy blow for her interlocutor. He was in complete shock when these words were spoken by the young Marquise, not believing his ears. What she said did not fit into his mind. She expressed sincere regret about what happened, emphasizing that she absolutely did not want everything to turn out exactly the way it did, which did not add any ease to the situation. At her words, the gentleman, a little embarrassed, held back a smile. He clearly felt confused, but the sincerity of her words still encouraged him a little. He couldn't hold back a tear, and the Duke standing next to him smiled when he saw it. It was a difficult moment, but the emotions it evoked were genuine. At this point, Artesia's mother, Malera, became furious. She literally raged, throwing things around, unable to contain her emotions caused by what was happening. She demanded that the butler repeat what he had said. The butler, slightly taken aback, replied that His Highness Archduke Ephron had wanted to know why he was devoted to Mrs. Artesia. Hearing these words, the woman exploded with rage. She could not contain her anger. Her irritation grew, and every moment seemed more and more painful for her. She couldn't understand who this man was, who dared to say such nonsense. There was no room for doubt in her eyes. It was all absurd and unbearable. The butler noted that the Duke had said that since Miss Artesia was now the rightful mistress of the estate, he should inform her of everything that had happened, and that she was now aware of the events. Malera was literally furious when she heard someone claim that her daughter was the rightful mistress, and how the butler just stood there listening to it. She couldn't believe such words. He noted that it was His Highness the Archduke himself, and that no one could dare to contradict him or say anything against him. After all, he could deal with him without the slightest consequences. The woman was angry, not knowing how to react to what had happened. She could not understand how this could have happened, and what she should do in this situation now. She asked for water, and the butler immediately went to her, only having time to say that he would bring water. He hurried, trying to fulfill her request as quickly as possible. Malera sat down, lost in thought, and wondered why she felt so strange and curious about where this girl could have met the Archduke. She wanted to figure it out, feeling a little anxious. Artesia's appearance was largely modest and could not compare with the magnificence of her mother. She did not have the charm and femininity that Malera displayed so vividly. She couldn't understand what kind of trick Artesia was playing on, why she was behaving like this. It only added to the complexity of her own perception of the situation. Archduke Ephron was a mystery to her. Malera began to wonder why he showed such attention to her daughter, what motivated him to court her and behave like that. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and the butler hurried to open it, not expecting what would happen next. He was ready to meet the one who decided to interrupt his thoughts and sort out the situation. He turned to the servant and asked what had happened, that he had come so unexpectedly. And without warning, the servant was a little confused and did not know what to answer, but soon pulled himself together and said, "The servant said that the retinue of His Highness Archduke Ephron had arrived, which meant that something important was about to happen." With this message, he immediately attracted the attention of the master. The servant added that the Archduke had got into the carriage, and Mrs. Artesia was with him. This raised even more questions, because no one expected such a visit and such an accompaniment. Artesia with the Archduke. The servant continued that they were heading towards Count Ender's estate, which added even more tension. It was unclear what this meeting was and how it would affect events. The owner of the estate, without hesitation, ordered to stay here and wait for their return, not to leave, and not to do anything until they returned to the estate of Rosan. Everything became more mysterious. The woman, having learned that the Archduke's entourage was here, was shocked. She clearly did not expect such a visit, and could not understand what all this could mean for her and for everyone. Looking at the butler and the servant, she looked at them reproachfully, expressing dissatisfaction with what was happening. In her eyes, one could see slight confusion and perhaps hidden anxiety. At this moment, young Master Lawrence entered the room, and the butler was not expecting his appearance at all. Lawrence, as always, was collected and immediately attracted attention with his appearance. Lawrence bowed, not hiding his interest, and asked what was going on. He was clearly interested in whether the butler was satisfied with his walk, for he sensed something unusual in it. Lawrence explained that Archduke Ephron's escort party was outside, and he was intrigued. He wanted to understand what exactly had brought them here and how it related to his surroundings. The butler, wasting no time, said that everything would soon become clear, and that he was ready to give all the details. He was ready to tell about what had happened, whatever it was, because the situation required an explanation. Mother approached Lawrence with a warm smile, welcoming him home. There was gentle concern in her words, but her eyes betrayed her wariness. She had noticed his presence and decided to pay attention. Lawrence bowed his head. Considering the possible reasons for this visit, he assumed that his mother had some problems with Duke Ephron, since their relationship had always been strained. However, he did not know the details. However, the woman brushed these thoughts aside, insisting that she had no problems with the Duke. She did not understand what kind of difficulties could arise between them, considering their relationship to be quite normal. At this point, she noticed Lawrence standing silently, frowning. Her keen observation could not help but notice that his gaze was heavy and thoughtful. He was clearly troubled by something which had caught her attention. She couldn't help but notice his sullen expression, and coming closer, looked at him carefully. She felt that something was bothering him, and this made her even more concerned about her son's condition. His mother, noticing his irritation, asked him what was wrong. She asked him what was upsetting him so much, since his appearance clearly indicated some inner unrest that he did not dare to express. Lawrence, with obvious concern, asked her if she had done anything that might offend Archduke Ephron. He could not understand where this displeasure came from, and whether his mother had unwittingly caused the conflict. The woman, slightly surprised, replied that she had not seen Ephron for the last time. He had left as soon as he learned that Artisia had gone away, and seemed to show no interest in what happened next. Lawrence frowned and said that he understood now, and suggested that she leave the situation alone. If Ephron came back, she should remain calm and leave things as they were until he sorted it out. The mother couldn't understand why Lawrence had made such a decision. He was clearly hiding something, and she found it difficult to understand why he was so insistent that she not interfere in what was happening. Lawrence expressed the opinion that Archduke Ephron always kept his word, and for Artesia, this was an unexpected confirmation of her usefulness. However, if someone like her mother intervened, it would only complicate the situation. The woman didn't immediately understand the meaning of his words, couldn't understand why Lawrence had mentioned that the intervention of someone like her could be a hindrance. She didn't understand what it meant. Lawrence assumed that her question was prompted by ignorance of the situation. He was sure that she was unaware of how the Archduke despised her. It was a well-known fact. Unfortunately, as Lawrence explained, because of this relationship with her mother, her father was unable to give him a more important role other than as a prince, which was disappointing but inevitable. The woman was in complete shock. From what she heard, she could not understand how to react to Lawrence's words. It was too unexpected and incomprehensible for her. At this time, Artesia stood in front of the butler, waiting for him to answer. She was focused and ready to talk, but she did not expect the conversation to take such a turn. Artesia announced that she would be getting married in the near future and would be taking Rosan's estate from her mother. She stated that the decision had already been made and the estate would be hers. The girl emphasized that she would need the butler's help in this process. She was going to organize the proper seizure of all the property of the Rosan family, so that everything would be done according to the law. Artesia reminded him that the butler knew almost everything about the property and the previous staff, and he was aware of all the intricacies which the man himself confirmed. He did not dispute it. She said that first, he needed to return to his rightful place and help her with this venture. This step was the first on the way to resolving all issues related to the estate and its fate. He noticed that his family saw only the shadow of sin in this and accused him of poisoning. However, he could not understand how he could return to their circle again if trust had already been lost. He said he couldn't figure out how to return to the world he had been banished from. It seemed impossible, especially as the situation had gotten worse. His whole life now seemed like an eclipse. Artesia decided to approach the butler, offering a solution to the situation. She said that she was ready to become the Marchioness of Rosan, take responsibility for everything that happened, and resolve all the issues that arose. She was determined to overcome other problems along the way. Artesia was sure that there was a solution to every situation, and she would find a way to overcome all difficulties. Eventually, the man agreed with her plan. He realized that she was determined enough to take control. Although he had doubts, he promised to follow her and trust her judgment. Soon they were riding in a carriage again, heading home. The atmosphere in the carriage was somewhat tense, but everyone understood that there would be a difficult journey ahead, full of trials that they would have to go through together. The Duke, noticing her determination, turned to the girl with praise. He said that he admired her ability to make such difficult decisions at such a young age. His words were full of respect and surprise. Artesia, a little surprised, asked him what exactly he was talking about, as she had not expected to hear such an assessment from him. She did not think that her actions could make such an impression on an experienced man. The gentleman, in reply, remarked that the best way to change someone's mind is to demonstrate your actions, not words. He was sure that Artesia understood this principle perfectly well and was already using it successfully. He added that for her age, it was really impressive, and she seemed to have learned to achieve her goals in this way for a long time. The girl replied that she was not trying to impress Mr. Butler. She simply offered him a suitable option that could suit both of them. Mr. Butler had been suffering from life's difficulties and was currently struggling to cope with the responsibilities of caring for his 14-year-old granddaughter, which did not make his situation any easier. He had long considered leaving the bar, feeling that his time there was up, but he said he would not have taken such a step without a compelling reason. He admitted that it was only thanks to the girl's proposal that he could take this step, because her approach turned out to be exactly what he needed at that moment. Suddenly, the gentleman noticed that the Archduke was laughing and, becoming interested, asked him again. He was slightly surprised by such a reaction, because everything was quite serious, and his question seemed quite appropriate. Then the butler, noticing her confusion, added that she probably considered herself a villain. This moment revealed some depth in her internal perception of what was happening, and it became clear that she was aware of the consequences. The woman lowered her head a little, as if losing confidence, and admitted that this was indeed the case. She spoke without any forced arrogance, as if she was experiencing a mistake she could not correct. A person who knows the truth always tries to avoid shame. She continued, realizing that it would be impossible to hide the truth. Her words sounded like pain for her own actions and thoughts about honor. She understood that only a person can decide his own destiny and correct mistakes, but she could not justify the butler's actions, although she remembered the truth, which greatly tormented her soul. So he would return and serve her, despite everything that had happened. His words could not fail to amaze, and in this simplicity, there was hidden both the strength and the responsibility with which he intended to continue his service. The girl was a little surprised by the Duke's words and asked him again, not quite understanding what exactly he wanted to say. His confidence and willingness to explain began to raise more and more questions in her. He responded by noting that it was clear to the man that he sincerely loved Rosan's family, and that she in turn was their last descendant, which also could not help but leave a mark on her perception of what was happening. After a few minutes of talking and thinking, the coachman announced that they had arrived. This was a momentous occasion, and his words were the signal to continue on to the next stage of their journey. The Duke carefully helped the lady out of the carriage, showing his respect and concern for her well-being. Everything happened with the nobility characteristic of his status and upbringing. The butler came running up to the Duke out of breath from his haste and greeted him respectfully. He was fully focused on his duty and could not afford to lose the opportunity to be polite. He inquired how the missus had arrived, noting every detail with attention. Then, bending down, he bowed to her, which was a sign of respect, emphasizing the importance of this visit. The butler also addressed His Highness, noting that Mr. Lawrence had said that he would certainly invite him to dinner. These words sounded like an informal invitation, but they already had a sufficiently formal tone. The Archduke said that this time he would still refuse, but promised that next time he would definitely agree to her request if circumstances were different. However, he added that if the lady herself had invited him, the situation would have taken a completely different turn, and he would without a doubt have agreed without hesitation. The girl immediately noted that being an unmarried lady, she had no right to invite a man at such a late hour, especially if he was not her relative. Then the gentleman noted with a slight smile that he had known from the very beginning that she would answer exactly like that, since her upbringing and position in society obliged her to do so. In response, the girl hastened to assure him that of course she forgave him for his persistence and asked him to be careful on the way back because the night was treacherous. The Archduke slowly mounted his horse, adjusted the reins, and set off directing his steed away from the castle, where strange feelings had led him today. But before he had time to drive far, the lady called out to him, asking him to stop for a moment, as if she had not had time to say something important. The girl, a little embarrassed, asked if she could ask him another question that had been bothering her for a long time, but she had not dared to ask before. The gentleman turned around and allowed her to speak, his long hair fluttering beautifully in the wind, creating an almost fairy tale effect in the moonlight. She cautiously asked why he was speaking to her so respectfully, since he had previously allowed himself to be much less reserved. The girl reminded her that during their last meeting, he treated her differently, but now he only smiled silently, as if he was hiding something behind that smile. The Archduke replied briefly that as Malera's daughter, she had given him no particular reason to show courtesy, and he had not considered it necessary before. But now, he continued, respect was a duty owed to the girl who was destined to become his wife and future mistress. Without giving the girl a chance to say a word in response, he abruptly turned his horse and quickly rode away, leaving her alone with her suddenly overwhelming feelings. The lady was standing in the yard, looking thoughtfully at the clear blue sky, when a maid came running towards her from afar, clearly excited about something important and hurrying to tell her the news. The girl was approaching so quickly that the lady, noticing her, turned around, and with slight surprise in her voice, asked what had happened and why she had come running so quickly, not hiding her excitement. Barely having caught her breath, the maid hastened to explain that young Master Lawrence wished to see his mistress immediately, as if the matter he wished to discuss could not tolerate delay for a moment. At this time, Lawrence himself stood at the window on the second floor and watched them with attention, and the lady, catching his gaze, immediately realized that they were really urgently waiting for her. She wasted no time in going to the door where her brother was and knocking to announce her arrival. Then entering, she gently asked what exactly had happened. Upon entering, she also noticed that he himself had recently been looking for her. And then Lawrence, as if confirming her guess, said that he had learned of her recent meeting with Archduke Effrond. The girl calmly explained that she had indeed met the Archduke by chance at Count Endar's estate, where they had briefly strolled through the garden, engaging in ordinary social conversation. Lawrence, clearly interested, asked if they were going to meet again, and Artisia thoughtfully asked if such meetings were really not considered unacceptable now. To this, the brother, with a slight smile, reminded that such meetings were entirely acceptable, since Artisia had turned 18 and had the right to decide for herself who to spend time with. Lawrence added that next time she should invite the Archduke to her house, since he himself had not yet had the opportunity to make his acquaintance due to Effron's rare appearances in society. They were in complete shock when they suddenly heard a strange noise behind the door. Something was rattling. There were sharp sounds, as if someone had dropped something or started a fight, and this disturbed their peace. There were screams, quite loud and harsh. Lawrence, trying not to attach any importance to it, noted that it was just another hysteria which had happened before and was not worth their attention. He said it was better not to interfere, because if the Archduke saw her injuries, it would be awkward. There was a chance that they would all be under suspicion, and the situation would only get worse. Artisia agreed inwardly, but she still couldn't understand why the screams sounded so angry. She was tormented by doubts, because even for hysteria, this seemed too violent a scene. She used to try to persuade her mother to calm down at such moments, believing that a peaceful conversation would help. But it was all useless. The screams did not stop, but only became louder. The mother would then snap at her, rudely reminding her that the girl could not be contradicted, that she was too impudent, and in general should know her place, not daring to contradict her elders. Then her body would be covered in bruises, and it seemed like the pain would never end. Her mother regularly took out her anger on her, not even considering it necessary to hide the traces of the beatings. The maid standing nearby was surprised that the mistress did not even try to go inside. Apparently, she thought that it was not her duty to interfere in other people's affairs. Quickly and quietly, she suggested that perhaps it would be better if she tried to replace her, to prevent the worst from happening. The maid explained that this was not what she had meant at all, but Artisia insisted that she take her out of there before things got any worse and before something could be fixed. However, the maid said, in fear, that if she dared to do this, the consequences would be terrible for everyone, because breaking the order was strictly punished. But Artesia firmly replied that if they all shared the punishment, the beatings would not be so terrible, and for their bravery, she was ready to generously compensate them for the treatment. After that incident, the girl began to reach out to her everywhere, as if finding Artesia as her only protection. And every time they met, warm gratitude shone in her eyes. Artesia then recalled how her mother would brew lemon tea for her, hoping to fool those around her. She thought that if her daughter grew her hair, no one would notice the bruises. The girl replied that not everything was as it seemed, saying that her brother had recently called her for a talk. They chatted for a while, and she assured him that she would never disobey her mother. Mom gently hugged Artesia, and with a kind smile said that it was right. After all, when she gets old, she will have no one to rely on except her own daughter, who will always be there. She then noted that she owed her life to Artesia. Then the girl carefully asked if her mother was really in a bad mood, trying to figure out how to cheer her up a little. She suggested to her mother that they go together to accompany His Majesty the Emperor, since they did not have to visit the palace. Artesia thought that this might distract her a little. The weather had been unbearably hot in recent days. They wanted to seat the emperor, at least for a while, for the sake of the amaranth, since the sea was very close, and it would be much cooler there. It would be a good idea to escape the heat. Artesia thought that perhaps Lawrence would have some free time to join them on the beach. If her brother was too busy with business, Artesia suggested that they go together with the emperor. She believed that her mother would not mind if the trip lifted her spirits. The mother agreed with this. She smiled softly, as if warmed by her daughter's care, and slowly drank a cup of aromatic tea, enjoying this short respite. The emperor, meanwhile, was heavily burdened with the cares of the Western Army, commanded by Archduke Ephron. These worries lay heavily on his shoulders. So when Malera invited him to get away from business for a while and hide from the sweltering heat for at least a few weeks, he decided that this was an excellent excuse to put pressing issues aside. The emperor and his mistress went away for a summer holiday, leaving everyone else in the castle. It was their way of escaping the noise and worries of the palace, enjoying the solitude and summer days away from business. For Artesia, this situation was a great opportunity to focus on herself a little. She had long needed rest and could afford not to think about family matters and imperial duties. After a few days, the butler began to notice strange things. In one of the corridors, he saw many boxes and some materials that he did not understand where they came from and why they were brought to the castle. At that moment, a red-haired girl entered the room and immediately greeted the butler with a smile. It was Emily, the famous owner of the famous costume shop in the city. She immediately attracted attention with her charisma. The butler couldn't help but notice that they hadn't ordered any new clothes, and the boxes he saw seemed out of place. He became wary and tried to figure out what these materials were and where they came from. Moreover, the butler noted with surprise that Mrs. Artesia was currently absent. She had gone to the summer palace with the cameraman, and there was no sign of her presence in the castle. This only added to the strangeness of the situation. Emily, however, smiled calmly and assured him that it was not as he thought. She had not come to take an order for the mistress, as he might have supposed. Her words were gentle, and her confidence reassured the butler a little. Emily clarified that she had not actually come to work with Mrs. Artesia, but with Mrs. The butler was taken aback. He had not expected that the conversation would be about Mrs. Artesia, since he did not know about it. He couldn't believe his ears when she said those words. All he knew was Artesia as the heiress, and now here was some other woman he knew nothing about. The girl noticed that the Archduke himself had sent her, and that he had given her complete freedom of action. He had allowed her to create as much as she wanted, without limiting her in anything, which made her task much easier. The butler knew that if the mistress saw the things scattered when she returned, he would be severely reprimanded again. He tried to put everything in order, knowing that her displeasure would be considerable. He apologized and said that today was not the time for apologies or justifications. He had not received permission from the lady to do so, so he could not act at his own discretion despite the current situation. At that moment, he noticed a knight who was nearby. The butler was a little confused and did not know how to answer correctly, since the situation seemed not entirely clear to him, and the knight looked like he was expecting something. After that, they greeted Marquise Rosanna with restraint, trying not to show unnecessary nervousness. Politeness and restraint were necessary in such a situation, so as not to disturb the atmosphere. The lady came out, and without losing time, greeted the knight as well as Emily, who was standing nearby. They exchanged polite phrases, and she immediately demonstrated her respect for their presence. The lady remarked that she did not remember inviting these people to her place, and a suspicion immediately arose in her mind that there was some purpose or important matter in this that required their presence. She mentioned that she had just returned, and that Duke Ephron himself had sent her. He had ordered an entire wardrobe for her, which was important, given the events that were to come, and she was willing to share the details. She was in complete shock when she heard the name of the Archduke. This news shook her greatly, as she did not expect such a reaction or such a turn of events. Everything that was happening seemed too unexpected. The lady added that Sophia was to escort Madame to the boudoir. It was an important assignment, and she knew that Sophia would perform her role with due attention and respect for her mistress. The maid readily accompanied the mistress, and the two of them looked very nice together. The atmosphere was calm and joyful, and everyone around them could not help but notice their harmony and good mood. At that moment, she noticed another gentleman standing nearby. He immediately bowed, showing his courtesy and respect for her presence, which could not fail to leave an impression. He introduced himself by saying that he was the knight Alphonse Rouen. He explained that he had come by order of His Majesty the Duke to provide the necessary protection to the Marquis at this important moment. He added that his mission was to protect the Marquise, and despite the formality of the situation, he seemed quite confident in his words. His presence underscored the importance of what was happening. She also noted that if she continued to fulfill her role as His Majesty's sword, she would become the shield of the Legion. It was a long process that required her determination and dedication to her duties. The lady expressed her understanding of the situation and asked the butler to be more kind and to show the lord to a room located in the same corridor as her own. This was an important instruction. The butler was extremely surprised and shocked by such an order. He said that he certainly could not occupy the new room without the permission of the lady and the young master. It was not according to the rules. The Marquise, without showing any emotion, coldly, said that he was obliged to obey her and fulfill her demands. There was no room for doubt, and her word was final in this matter. She asked him again whether it was worth reminding him again who she was and what position she occupied. It was said with such an emphasis that the butler could not dispute her authority. Then one of the servants came up to her and advised her that it would be best to do without such threats. He suggested discussing the situation in a calmer atmosphere to avoid unnecessary tension. He noted that the problem concerned the whole family, but the knight, without letting him finish, grabbed him by the shoulders and forced him to his knees. It was a harsh reminder of the power in this house. Artisia said bitterly that the butler had failed again. Such stupid people, as he disgraced the name of the Marquis's family in front of His Majesty, the Archduke. This could not remain without consequences. One mistake is not the end of the world. It could be forgiven if he was just a little lazy. The owner might not notice that his labor is not bearing fruit and would not pay attention. But if this happens twice, if he makes her a laughingstock again, then Lord Alphonse and the Archduke will see her in this light, and her name will be ruined in the eyes of those on whom her future depends. Artisia asked to be reminded who she was, and her gaze was tired, as if her existence was being questioned again, and she needed to prove her place. She didn't like unnecessary questions. The butler was absolutely horrified. Usually this girl was quite gentle and calm, but today something in her behavior was clearly not right. He felt that something bad was about to happen, and he could not be fooled. He realized that if the lady found out about this, he would be in trouble. He only hoped that she would not make what had happened public, because the consequences could be too serious for everyone. The maid got angry at this. She didn't believe that there would be a punishment, even if the mistress found out. On the contrary, she hoped that this situation would end as quickly as it began. At that moment, the Marquise turned to him again and asked who she was. But her tone was decisive, almost unperturbed. She was waiting for a precise answer, and there was no time to think. He quickly but quietly said that she was a young marquise. The answer was reserved with a hint of anxiety. He didn't want to get into trouble, but he knew that he couldn't hide the truth. Then the lady, turning to him, said in a restrained tone that if he understood what was happening, he would need to prepare something for Lord Alphonse and arrange a room for his escort. She also added that when he had completed all the errands, he would need to bring her the keys to the vault and the trading ledger. The man was shocked by her calm and asked again what keys she was talking about. Artesia replied that if he didn't understand her demands again, he would be in serious trouble. There was no doubt in her voice, only a cold confidence that she was in control of the situation. She clarified that she was talking about the keys to the vault. After her words, they left, and the butler, out of habit, bowed his head, trying to remain calm despite this whole unclear moment. Every day, he gave Miss no peace, constantly tormenting her, which caused her extreme irritation. Finally, the maid could not bear it any longer, and in a rage hit him, showing her determination. The Marquise, having learned of what had happened, immediately apologized, although the prescription had only recently been delivered, and she had already witnessed the unpleasant scene. All this was happening before her eyes, which greatly upset her. However, the knight who was observing the situation noted that there was nothing inherently wrong with it. He emphasized that the Duke had always said that the position of a lady in a family was a very complicated and ambiguous situation. He added that even if he did not understand the lady's actions, he would not doubt her motives. All her actions, in his opinion, had a logical explanation, and they always had their reasons. And even Lawrence, who had always been devoted to her, did not trust her completely. Despite all the closeness of their relationship, the shadow of doubt still remained, and this was what upset her most. The military sent by His Highness was a sign of trust, showing that she had support. This gesture seemed to help her strengthen her position and reach a new level. Now, with this step, she could move on. She realized that this was a chance for her to change her destiny and take an important step in life, despite the difficulties she had to overcome. At the entrance to the jeweler's shop stood the Duke, who said that they should visit Mr. White. There was a certainty in his words, as if it was something necessary and important for their further actions. His servant asked him if he had found the stone with which he planned to propose to Malera's daughter. It was the moment when all the questions that seemed unimportant became decisive for the future. The boy also asked the Duke if it was true that he was really going to marry the Marquise's daughter. The Duke, without wasting any time, replied that he had already made this decision himself, and all that was left for him to do was to act according to plan. The knight did not hide his indignation. He could not understand how His Highness, knowing who Malera was, could treat the offer so calmly, especially since giving a precious stone, a symbol of a broken family, was extremely inappropriate. The servant, seeing his doubts, noted that if he did not believe in his abilities and insight, it would be better to refuse this step. However, the knight was sure that his opinion was important and did not give up. They mounted their horses and set out at once. Their intention was clear, and although the road was long, their determination did not weaken. They were striving for their goal, despite all the difficulties. Suddenly, he remembered how she had asked him for something when he proposed. It was an important promise that she had left in his memory, and it could not be forgotten. He was taken aback by her request, and immediately asked again, not believing his ears. It was something unexpected, requiring an explanation. He could not understand what exactly was hidden behind her words. The lady confirmed her words, saying that she really needed Olga's heart. It was something important and mysterious that required attention and awareness of the depth of her intentions. He didn't know why she did it. Why was this request for the family jewel so important to her? She was his confidant, and he decided he would trust her despite all his doubts. It seemed that the mourning period had now arrived. The servant noticed that his master was worried, but he still knew that he had to continue on his way. The time for the visit might not come soon, but they had to move on. The gentleman confirmed the correctness of the information, but his facial expression betrayed slight dissatisfaction, as if something in this matter did not quite suit him. Apparently, he expected more. He knocked on the door, raising his eyebrows slightly, and asked politely if there was anyone inside. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of wariness in it. The door opened, and the girl, barely looking at them, asked with slight surprise how she could help such grateful gentlemen as they. Her voice was soft, and her gaze sincerely interested. The servant standing with his head raised said that they had come on recommendation and handed the girl a letter of recommendation. He handed it over with respect, making it clear that they were all acting on orders from their superiors. The girl took the letter and, looking at it, realized that His Highness Archduke Ephron was standing in front of her. Anxiety flashed in her eyes, but she tried to remain calm. She let him go with restraint, slightly bowing her head, and apologized regretfully, explaining that they had not wanted to disturb them at such a difficult moment. Her words sounded sincere, but it was clear that she was uneasy. However, the girl quickly calmed down and added that there was really nothing to worry about. The letter of recommendation written by her uncle, Odorov, said that His Highness was looking for a precious stone. She said that she really confirmed her uncle's words, because according to him, her father had the right of ownership to this stone. Unfortunately, her father had recently passed away, and the trade book of the jewelry store remained intact. She promised to find it and help. She excitedly asked what stone they were looking for and waited impatiently for the answer. The gentleman, with a serious expression on his face, said that it was the heart of St. Olga, without showing any unnecessary emotion. Hearing this name, the girl froze and her hand trembled. Fear was reflected on her face, and her eyes were filled with anxiety. Her entire behavior betrayed her inner tension and excitement. Artisia was shaking with excitement. The knight, noticing her condition, decided to help and took the mug of tea from her hands. He thought that she had already sold this tea to someone, but his suspicions were not entirely correct. The girl, swallowing back tears, explained that it was not just tea, but a contract that transferred ownership of St. Olga's heart. She looked closely at the knight, trying to figure out how he would react. She added that this contract had been made 7 years earlier, when the knight had bought the promissory note. She was trying to show that her actions were not accidental, that she was not to blame for what had happened. However, despite his explanations, the knight continued to delay payment and did not fulfill his obligations. This happened day after day, and it became increasingly difficult for the girl to remain calm in such a situation. If you look closely at the contract, it becomes clear. The ownership was transferred only after all payments were made. The girl understood that she could sue and win, but she did not know how to proceed. She noted that if a lawsuit were possible, they would have done so long ago. But because the diamond had been given to Madame Marquise Camelia, they had no other options and found themselves in a difficult situation. It was Marchioness Camelia, and her disciple was Archduchess Roygor. The girl remembered her knowing how big the age difference was between these women and how it affected their relationship. Archduchess Roygor obeyed Marquise Camelia as if she were her own mother, due to the huge age difference and the respect she had for her. This greatly influenced her behavior and decisions. Moreover, Marquise Camelia was the most reliable supporter of Archduke Roygor. The girl, unable to bear it, began to cry, and her servant quietly noted that this situation was indeed very difficult and hopeless. Artesia's father invested almost all his fortune in Olga's heart, hoping for her feelings. But after one unpleasant incident, he suffered a collapse and went bankrupt. Broken by this, he soon died. At one point, they took her father's life, and the Archduke meanwhile declared that he would take away this important document, which was supposed to be decisive in the current situation. The girl, however, did not agree with this decision. For her, it was still just a piece of paper that could not compensate for the losses suffered by her family and personal grief. They did not burn the document, although Artesia's father could not forget his mistake in the past. But the master, in turn, said that she did so for the well-being of her father, and this is important. Despite his father's words, he needed this document, and he was sure that he himself would find a way to properly use it. Everything that was happening had special meaning for him, and he knew how to act. In the evening, the servant noticed something curious, but the master did not understand what it was about. He simply could not grasp the essence of his observations, and therefore did not show interest. At first, the servant assumed that Lady Marquise Rose could simply ask him for an expensive engagement gift, as often happens. But for him, this was not as important a point as it seemed at first glance. No one could have imagined that Archduke Roygor would be involved in this matter. Not only was he one of the most influential men in the empire with a right to the throne, but he was also the uncle of the future emperor. This is indeed so. The servant, finding himself in a difficult situation, did not know what to do. The young Amortis Rosa had just given cause for a quarrel with Madame Marquise Camelia, thereby aggravating the situation. If he decides to file a lawsuit over the precious diamond, it could completely destroy the reputation of the Marchioness of Camelia. Such a move would not only undermine her image, but also lead to serious consequences. An honest merchant was robbed of a precious stone, which led to his bankruptcy and then to his death. Because of this, his children were left without parents, and now they are orphans, which is a tragedy for the whole family. This is bound to cause quite a scandal, especially considering that at this moment, His Highness is looking for the perfect gift to propose to. The whole situation could seriously affect his choice. The Duke categorically stated that he had no intention of divulging the honor of Madame Marquise Camelia, much less of exposing the White family affairs to public discussion. He was sure that it would do no good. The gentleman could not understand what was the point of fighting in this conflict if the outcome of this military move could only ruin the reputation of the well-bred ladies. In this matter, he saw only consequences for their image. He also noted that the whole situation resembled a complex riddle in which it was necessary to find a way out. The servant was surprised, as he did not immediately understand what exactly the master meant in his thoughts. The gentleman drew attention to an ancient legend which said that if the beautiful princess agreed to marry, she must ask 3 riddles, to which the groom must find the correct answers. Then the servant realized that it was just a fairy tale in which, after many failed attempts, a poor young man used his wits to solve the riddles and win the heart of the princess. The gentleman hoped that this riddle would be the only one he would have to solve in his life, because he did not want to find himself in a situation where he would have to find a solution to such a difficult problem. He thought it might be better to go back to the beginning, where Lady Marquise had once asked him for help in finding the heart of Saint Olga. And this request was far from ordinary. At this point, the diamond was in the hands of a baron who owned a casino. This was an important event, as Baron Itz had influence and was known in society as the owner of a large establishment. Fontinga had a huge main casino, which dominated the others, as well as several smaller casinos, 3 or 4 in total, each attracting its own audience. He asked how Daniel could know so much about the casino and expressed doubt that he was involved in gambling, since the information seemed too detailed and well thought out. Daniel replied that he was categorically not involved in gambling, but his younger brother had a debt at a casino. He repeatedly helped him pay off the debt, paying off the debt, so that his brother would not end up in an unpleasant situation. If Daniel was indeed the owner, the gentleman could assume that he had some understanding of the complexity and stress involved in running such a business, giving him a unique insight into the problem. Most likely, this was one of Uncle Roiger's unexpendable sources of income, and the gentleman could not help but wonder what they were going to do with this knowledge and how they planned to act in the future. Then the gentleman thought about what to do, because the trustworthy person deceived by the casino owner died. Understanding this, they will hardly be able to pretend that nothing happened. The gentleman decided that if we were talking about a casino, then now would be the best time to visit there before the situation got out of control and more information could be gathered. The Duke quickly got ready, checked all the necessary preparations, and the whole group headed to their destination, determined to figure out what was happening. When they entered the casino, they saw that many people had gathered there. All the guests were wearing masks, creating an atmosphere of mystery and secrecy typical of such establishments. The establishment's income was particularly high today, but suddenly a servant hurried to them, choosing a moment when no one heard them, and reported that something serious had happened. The Baron got angry when he heard the news. He reminded them that he had repeatedly warned his people not to allow themselves to disturb the atmosphere of the hall. Otherwise, the guests would lose interest in the game. The servant nevertheless tried to explain that this was not a matter of trifles, but of a truly serious problem that could influence the entire course of events of the evening. The Baron did not immediately understand what exactly was going on, but the servant finally explained. Archduke Ephron had arrived to visit them, and his presence was changing all their plans. He had the actual title deed to St. Olga's heart with him. The Baron, seeing this, was completely confused and almost immediately went berserk with unexpected anger and fear. Meanwhile, the Archduke entered the room without any fuss, and the Baron hastened to pay his respects to him, pretending that he was not embarrassed by either the situation or his own excitement. The Baron wondered what had happened that was so important that His Highness had personally graced this old poor gambling establishment, clearly unworthy of his attention with his presence. The Archduke approached him, holding the papers in his hands, and without further ado showed them to the Baron, making a silent gesture to indicate that he should look and say whether he recognized the document. The Baron looked more closely at the papers on offer, and having read them, suddenly realized that these were the rights to the heart of St. Olga. He had difficulty remembering that he had bought it 7 years ago. The Duke remarked in a cold tone that the ownership had passed to him since the Baron had never paid the full amount for the jewel during all these years, which meant that he could take the stone without hindrance. The Baron tried to remain calm and said that he would first like to verify the authenticity of the diamond and check the data against the records in his trading book. The Baron was in complete horror, not believing his ears. His face stretched out, and his hands trembled slightly from the tension. He quickly began to say that he categorically did not agree to such a demand, finding it completely unacceptable. But the Duke did not even deign to answer the Baron. He commanded his servants to comb every room and immediately find the necessary document, making it clear that he would tolerate neither objections nor delays in this matter. The Baron, overcoming his excitement, firmly noted that no matter what high position the Archduke occupied, he still had no right to so brazenly violate the order and laws in force in this institution. The Archduke, with an icy grin, said that if the Baron really had any claims, then he should prove them in practice and bring the diamond right now without further ado. The Baron hastened to assure that he had a magnificent blue diamond, much larger and more beautiful than the one required, and if he were allowed to exchange one stone for another, he was ready to settle everything immediately. But the gentleman replied with cold determination that this was only a pathetic attempt to avoid demands. He needed precisely the heart of St. Olga, and he would not replace this gift with anything else. After all, the lady for whose sake all this fuss was being arranged had previously wished to receive the heart of St. Olga as a gift, and the Duke had no right to disobey her will. At this tense moment, one of the servants approached the Archduke, and bowing his head respectfully, announced that he had discovered something extremely important that the master absolutely must see. In a damp, stinking basement, hidden from the eyes of strangers, there was a gloomy dungeon. The stone walls were covered with green mold, cold and dampness blew from everywhere, and in the depths stood old iron cages securely locked. As they slowly descended the creaking stairs, the gentleman experienced a real shock. His eyes widened in horror, his heart began to beat faster, and everything inside him turned cold from the abomination that appeared before him. In the semi-darkness of the basement, he saw many children huddled in locked cages. Their thin figures trembled from fear and cold. At that moment, rage overwhelmed the master completely, and he immediately realized that a slave trade was taking place here. His servant standing nearby was completely perplexed. He could not understand since when they had started to allow themselves to do such things in these places. Everything that was happening seemed to him a monstrous violation of all laws and rules. The Duke, too, could not find an explanation for how such terrible things could be thought up. It was beyond her comprehension that someone would dare to allow such atrocities within such noble walls. The thought that such small children could be treated so cruelly was truly terrifying. Their defenseless faces full of fear gave neither heart nor mind peace, making one shudder internally. At this time, Artesia had a long conversation with the Marquise. She carefully noted that she had learned that, after the trials he had endured, the Crown Prince could gain new experiences that could influence his future direction, and she believed that this was exactly how it would be. However, the Marchioness, sitting in a luxurious chair, did not understand where Lady Rosanna was leading her thoughts. Her slightly surprised look indicated that she did not see the logical connection in the words of her young interlocutor. The lady calmly continued to reflect, noting that gambling, illegal substances, bribery, and other such things were quite acceptable in high society. After all, the true aristocracy had long ago learned to turn a blind eye to such things. However, harming children could cause public outrage so strong that His Majesty would be forced to pretend to be angry in order to maintain control over popular sentiment and avoid unrest. The Marchioness, not grasping the full depth of the hints, decided that all this was connected with a personal threat. It seemed to her that through the conversation about children, Artesia was trying to indirectly intimidate her or put pressure on her position. But Artesia calmly and reservedly explained that her words had a completely different meaning. She was not threatening, but only hinting subtly, wanting to warn and allow the right decision to be made in time. She emphasized that it would be in the interests of the Marquise to give in and take a step back for the sake of His Highness Archduke Roigar. After all, not only her position, but also her future at court depended on it. The Marchioness, confused by the stream of subtle hints, admitted that she did not understand what the lady was leading to. In response, she carefully asked Artesia what she thought of the relationship between Archduke Roigar and Baron Itz. Baron Itz was known as a narrow-minded and greedy man, willing to bribe anyone he saw as having the slightest potential to benefit himself. His reputation had long been distrusted. However, such a decent person as the Marquise could hardly even imagine that behind the Baron's outward politeness there was hidden a far from clean nature and a readiness to do anything for his own benefit. She could not even imagine that the beautiful gemstone she had recently received from the Baron as a gift had actually been stolen by him from an honest and respected merchant. Marquise Camellia finally realized that the young lady before her possessed an intelligence and insight that was rare to find. The thought made her slightly sad that their meeting had occurred so late. She felt sorry that fate had not brought them together earlier, so she asked the lady for a short minute to personally say a few words to her new young companion, as if addressing her own daughter. The Marquise gave her a special cabinet in which a single very important stone was kept. This object was not just a jewel, but carried a special meaning passed down through generations. The necklace was designed specifically for the heart of St. Olga. The Marchioness asked the young lady to accept it without changes, respecting its original appearance and the history that was kept in each of its features. Many years ago, when she was not yet recognized as the daughter of a marquise and did not bear the title of lady, she had the chance to see from afar the most noble woman, Her Majesty the Empress, which left an unforgettable impression. It was then that she heard a touching story about a family heirloom that belonged to Madame Viscountess Pache, the Empress's personal maid and close friend, whose gem was an object of admiration. When the Empress addressed her friend of humble origin with particular tenderness and respect, even praising her jewel, young Camellia experienced such envy that this scene was forever imprinted in her memory. She was still tormented by the resentment that such a noble gem belonged to a greedy man far from true aristocracy. This injustice left a heavy mark on her soul. The Marquise explained that the necklace was only a temporary storage for the stone, since the statue of St. Olga, for which it was created, had mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind only legends. The Marchioness Rosanna, with a slight smile, said that she understood everything perfectly. Her words sounded plausible enough that Madame Marchioness Camellia could accept them without hesitation. The Marquise added that if she had really been ready to bow before the Empress, she would have given away her jewelry long ago without thinking about the price or consequences, thereby emphasizing the seriousness of her intentions. The gem became more than just a pretty thing for her. It was a trophy of sorts, a symbol of influence and power that she kept as a reminder of her victories. The Marchioness Camellia hoped that the lady would be able to properly convey all the subtle shades of her feelings so that no one would have any doubts about her true intentions and commitment. Marquise Camellia also noticed that their interesting conversations could become the basis for a strong friendship. She openly invited Artesia to visit her more often to continue their interesting conversations. Artesia gave her a slight smile but said nothing. It was only when she was already sitting in the carriage that she realized that everything was gradually beginning to change and that the events around her were taking an unexpected turn. Upon returning home, Artesia immediately wrote a letter to Hansen's family. In it, she outlined a plan to discuss and prepare the conditions for their early return and further actions. After several days of painstaking work, all the preparations were finally completed. Now all that remained was to carry out the plan and obtain the property that belonged to the Marquise Rosan. The following morning, the usual morning bustle reigned at Rosan's estate. The maid, with exaggerated respect, bowed to Archduke Ephron, greeting him with due formality. She took her time knowing that her task was to lead her guest to where he would be comfortable. With a slight bow of her head, the maid announced that she would be accompanying him to Mrs. Artesia's boudoir. This was an important point, and her voice was soft, but with a slight urgency that suggested the importance of the visit. The gentleman was completely amazed when he heard that he would be taken to the boudoir. It was a place where people usually spent time in an intimate setting, and he could not understand what exactly awaited him in this house. The boudoir was a room where traditionally lovers were invited to flirt with each other, to spend time together, leaving all formalities at the door. The fact that he was being sent there made him think. At that moment, his thoughts became more acute, and he suddenly realized that he himself had now become the very lover to whom Mrs. Artesia had addressed herself. The thought that he had become her fiancé flashed through his mind, which gave the situation a special poignancy. This realization made him feel uneasy. Suddenly, his cheeks were flushed with embarrassment, and his face turned red. He didn't know what to do with these feelings that were tearing him apart from the inside. When they entered the boudoir, Emily was already helping Mrs. Artesia, carefully choosing an outfit for her. Under her attentive gaze, Artesia looked truly dazzling. Her skin was snow white, like porcelain, and any color suited her perfectly. At this moment, the maid announced that Archduke Frone had arrived. Emily, hearing this, could not hide her joyful excitement. Seeing the gentleman in person was a great event for her, which she had been waiting for. For maids and servants, it was an important part of their lives to see their master in front of them. His appearance was always perceived as a sign of respect, and they could not ignore this moment. All the attendants bowed their heads in respect, and the gentleman himself, forgetting himself for a moment, could not tear his eyes away from Artesia. She was truly magnificent, and his admiration was evident, although he tried to maintain restraint. Artesia was incredibly beautiful. However, feeling his gaze fixed on her, he suddenly lowered his eyes. His embarrassment grew, and he tried to hide his feelings, trying not to reveal what was going on in his soul. Emily smiled and said that that was enough laughter, and the lady corrected her a little. There was already silence in the hall, and the lady felt that the moment was not quite right for further conversation. The Archduke apologized for his early visit. The lady added with a light remark that it was more than 2 hours since breakfast, and the time for morning meetings had long since passed. These words sounded calm, but with a certain nuance. Emily calmly remarked that she had observed the outfit enough to know where to go next. She added that she had to take her leave, and then without further ado began to pack, preparing to leave the room. Emily quickly finished her preparations, and without saying anything more, she left, followed by her assistants. She quietly closed the door, and her footsteps faded outside the room, leaving everyone in complete silence. Only the Duke and the Marquises remained in the room, and they were alone. The atmosphere became somewhat tense, and both felt the heaviness in the air increase. They had to decide what to do next. The situation eased a little when the lady asked the gentleman to sit down and offered him tea. The atmosphere in the room softened a little, but there was still a slight awkwardness between them as the conversation was just beginning. After a while, they were sitting at the table with cups of tea, feeling a little more relaxed. The silence in the room was broken only by the sounds of their breathing and the gentle clatter of the cups they held carefully in their hands. The gentleman, as if thinking out loud, remarked that he felt a little more cheerful. He admitted that the previous night had been difficult for him, and he had not been able to get enough rest, which had affected his well-being. The lady watching him added that, in her opinion, communication with Amelia had been more tiring for him than a sleepless night. Her words sounded sympathetic, although with a slight emphasis on the gentleman's experiences. The Duke sighed a little and admitted that he was simply not used to such situations. The previous night had been an overload for him, and he wanted to reassure himself of a few things before he apologized to her. The lady, despite all the circumstances, did not object, and was ready to listen to him to the end. He said that he had promised to bring the heart of St. Olga, but in the end, it turned out to be impossible. Lawrence smiled and noted that he probably wouldn't be able to give it to her as a wedding present, as he had originally planned. It was all much more complicated than he had expected. The lady, with slight regret, noted that, in reality, they were both in this situation, and most likely she herself would have to ask for forgiveness. She realized the complexity of what was happening. In fact, while he was busy with his affairs, she secretly met with the Marquise Camille. This was due to her desire to obtain a necklace that could play an important role in the future. The lady, taking a deep breath, apologized for the deception. She admitted that she had known about the situation for a long time, that she had been playing the game from the very beginning, which was completely unexpected for the gentleman, who did not expect this from her. Yesterday, he was very excited when he encountered a difficult situation. He was lost in thought. Should he pretend that he did not see anything in order to get the gem in the end? The question remained unclear. He thought that maybe he should finally solve all his problems, even if it meant losing the precious jewelry that was so important to her. She, in turn, hoped that he would not get the stone. The lady asked him a question that implied something more. She asked him if he knew why she liked him. It was not just curiosity, but a desire to understand his true essence. These words confused the gentleman a little. He, somewhat puzzled, asked again what she was actually talking about, not fully understanding what was hidden behind this question and what exactly she wanted to hear from him. She noted that as a nobleman, he could live peacefully in his own world, protected from all worries and difficulties. But despite this, his heart is always directed to where the people are in need. She pointed out that his actions and thoughts always moved towards those people whose well-being depended on his decisions. This was important because he was always guided by the interests of the people. The Duke was surprised to realize that she was assessing him so deeply. At that moment, it became clear to him what exactly she was talking about and why she was assessing him so, although he had never expected such frankness. Now that he understood everything, he felt relieved. He realized that this moment had been a turning point for him, and now he understood why she valued his actions and intentions so much. He had not expected such words from her, but despite all the unexpectedness, he was pleased to hear this confession. It gave him confidence that she valued in him not only his title, but also his personal qualities. He noted that he had plans to meet the Chancellor later, and that this meeting would be in person. This was an important step, and he wanted to make sure that everything would go according to plan before making further decisions. She said she understood perfectly well how important it was to be a fair and admirable person, and that the Duke had made a wise decision in doing so. She was sure it was the right move, worthy of respect. She also explained that His Highness, despite his military activities, has no direct connection to politics, and that there is no need to change the established image. Yet there is still time to follow current plans. Artesia thought it was important to check in on things sometimes, and it was reasonable. She believed that such steps could only help in making further decisions, even if at first glance it did not seem to matter much. She noticed that he was not interested in what she was going to do with the heart of St. Olga. It was her decision, and she would decide what to do with this important symbol. But he did not seem to ask himself this question. When she explained that she planned to give the heart of St. Olga to the Empress, he looked at her with respect, as if he understood the importance of her decision. This step was not just a gesture for her, but something greater and more significant. She said that it would be right if the thing that belonged to her precious friend remained in her hands. Keeping this symbol with herself, in her opinion, would be the most respectful and correct act. The gentleman looked down and said that he understood her completely. He acknowledged that her decision was wise and supported her, even if his own feelings at that moment remained a little complicated and contradictory. Then the lady asked him if he was upset, because her look at him suggested that he was not feeling well. She noticed his anxiety, but was not sure that she understood his condition correctly. The gentleman said they were able to do this because information about Viscountess Pasher had come to light. He suspected that it was all part of a plan and could not understand why he should be worried about it. He added that without a gift, it would be difficult to make a truly lavish proposal, and it would not be enough to impress and earn her consent to marry. The lady, hearing these words, lowered her head and began to understand what exactly was being discussed. Her thoughts gradually led to the understanding that her role in this process was also significant. He remarked that he would like to take her hand at his disposal and was ready to do everything possible to offer her something valuable that would become a symbol of their future union and an important step in their relationship. He took out a bracelet and carefully placed it on her hand. At that moment, he said that he would replace the traditional wedding gift with this piece of jewelry, which would serve as a reminder of the important moment. When he was in a jewelry store looking for the perfect piece of jewelry for Olga's heart, he suddenly realized that this bracelet should also be a gift that would leave its mark on her life and on their relationship. After that, he got down on one knee in front of her, unable to hide his feelings and intentions. His gesture was a symbol of his readiness to devote himself completely to her and their future together. He said the words he had wanted to say for so long, and proudly asked her to marry him, hoping that this moment would be as important for her as it was for him. The lady was very surprised by this action. She did not expect that he would make such a proposal right now, and her heart was filled with a feeling of confusion and at the same time joy from the unexpectedness. At this time, in front of the Department of Public Security, everyone was demanding the public execution of the criminals who had been caught in front of the people. Emotions were running high on the street, but they were far from all this. It is said that when children were kidnapped, they were often released into the hunting grounds, and there was only one thing left to do: kill them for fun. It was absolutely monstrous and unimaginably cruel. But it happened at the time. The casino owner, rumored to be a baron, was kidnapping children and sending them to Count Ison. It was not his only such act, but it was the one that attracted the attention of the authorities and raised serious suspicions. Summer Palace Amarant. The emperor shouted in irritation that he did not want to hear about communicating with a man like Count Ison Lawrence. In this context was confused because his connection with the count was too complicated. Lawrence tried to justify himself by saying that he and the earl had no personal relationship. All that connected him with Ison was the connection between their fathers, and that was the real basis of what happened between their families. Lawrence's brother, with a hint of contempt in his voice, called him a puppy, and added that he was incapable of independently assessing the complexity of the situation. He perceived his behavior as naive and stupid, which only made everything worse. He stated that of all the things that happen in this world, the slave trade is the worst evil, especially when it comes to the lives of innocent children who are being killed. Lawrence did not know how to react to his brother's words, because they were a shock to him. The issue of bribery was particularly acute, as it was so ingrained that no one could get around it. Lawrence asked for this issue to be thoroughly investigated, as it was an important step in combating the slave trade. The importance of the situation was so great that even the stubborn Lawrence, who usually did not accept compromises, was willing to turn a blind eye to corruption in order to deal with this terrible incident, which only confirmed the seriousness of what was happening. Lawrence had just finished applying yellow polish to his nails when the Marchioness of Malera entered the room. She immediately caught everyone's attention with her beauty, even in such an unremarkable situation. Her steps were confident, and she looked as if nothing could faze her. She was incredibly beautiful and elegant, and her outfit, a bright red dress, emphasized her grace. All eyes in the room instantly turned to her. A slight smile crossed her lips, and she approached the emperor as if not noticing what was happening around her. The marquise approached the emperor and gently asked him to calm down, convincing him that he should leave all his worries behind. She knew how important it was to remain calm in such a situation, and her words sounded confident and gentle as always. The emperor noticed that she had hurried to him, worried about the health of her son, who in his opinion was too vulnerable. He smiled slightly, but still could not hide his concern. He immediately understood that she had come here not only out of duty, but also out of a feeling of maternal affection. The Marchioness explained that she had just spoken to a doctor who said that excessive worry could have a serious effect on her son's heart. She did her best to ease his worries and concerns, knowing how important it was to maintain harmony in the family. The emperor noticed that she, as always, tried to protect his son, but at the same time, this prevented him from becoming mature. He could not understand why, at her age, she was still so worried, and did not allow him to cope with difficulties on his own. It seemed strange to him, even a little ridiculous. He remembered that at his age he was already ready to fight for his place in the sun, and for the right to be an heir. The Marquise believed that it was her care and attention that made him so defenseless, and this did not give him the opportunity to develop and be independent. Then the emperor firmly said that his son should immediately break off relations with Ison, and he would try to solve all the other problems himself. It was his decision, and he hoped that the Marquise would finally understand that she should let her son go, give him the opportunity to become independent. He thought about how lucky he was to have Cedric, who was a fair and loyal man. But even his strength could not protect him from the weakness that arose when it came to those close to him. The emperor realized that he had to be wise and decisive in any situation, despite his feelings. Thinking about Artisia, he decided that he would not interfere in Lawrence's affairs. The problems associated with his half-brother should not distract him from more important tasks. Lawrence, although his brother, was not so important in his plans. Upon his return, he considered how he could establish a closer relationship with Cedric. It was not as easy as it seemed. He knew that trust had to be built, but the process took time. The emperor knew he had to find a way to mend his relationship with Cedric. However, he knew he had to be careful. Just because he was Cedric's father didn't mean their bond was strong enough. He knew that, despite the ties of kinship, he had no reason to make Lawrence his heir. Such a responsibility should not be passed on simply by right of blood. He could not make a decision that did not have good reasons. The next day at Rosan's estate, the atmosphere was tense. Everything was set for a small tea party, but as usual, something was going wrong. Rosan was going to meet several important people, and her attention was focused on the little things. The maid approached Rosan and said she was ready to do her hair. However, the mistress thought that this was not necessary for an ordinary tea party. Her habit of not paying attention to small details seemed characteristic of her calm attitude to life. The maid insisted on her own emphasizing that her work had to be done perfectly, no matter the circumstances. Her commitment to high standards did not allow her to leave anything for later. She believed in the importance of every detail. As the maid lifted Rosan's sleeves, she noticed the bracelet that had been given to her by the Duke. It was a small but noticeable piece of jewelry that immediately attracted attention. The lady was visibly embarrassed, realizing how easily this gesture could be read. The maid also noticed that Rosan's sleeves had become fashionable lately. She couldn't help but notice that her mistress's style had changed. Fashion had apparently become an important part of her life, and now her attention was paid to such details as clothing and accessories. Rosan met Hazel and Miel, whom she had not met before. It was her first time meeting them, and she was trying hard to make a good impression. She listened carefully to their conversation, trying to understand what their goals and motives were. They noticed a bracelet on the table that had once been a gift from Archduke Ephron. This bracelet was certainly magnificent. Its sparkling diamonds caught everyone's eye, making everyone admire its beauty. This diamond bracelet has become famous lately. Everyone who heard about it was fascinated and interested. It seems that there was not a single lady who did not know about this jewelry. Indeed, if you count all the articles and rumors related to this bracelet, it will be impossible to count them. Ephron's bracelet has become not just an ornament, but a symbol of his love and nobility. At that moment, the maid burst into the room, and the mistress followed her. She immediately asked what had happened, because the guests were already in the house, and such behavior was completely inappropriate. The maid came closer and whispered important news to her mistress. There was alarm in her words, as if something unexpected and extremely important had happened. Everyone's attention was riveted to her story. The maid quietly said that Mrs. Malera had returned. This news stunned everyone. Malera, who had not been in this house for a long time, suddenly returned, causing great concern among those around her. Malera entered the hall immediately, asking what all this meant, and what kind of carriage was standing at the door. She was clearly excited, because returning home is always associated with many questions and expectations. The maids were quick to explain that the mistress had arranged a tea party for her guests. This decision was unexpected, given the circumstances, and caused discontent among some of those present. This news outraged the woman to the depths of her soul. She could not understand how it was possible to arrange a tea party without taking care of more important matters. There was resentment and irritation in her voice. She exclaimed that it was crazy to behave like that. While she was away, The house was in complete disarray, and she could not come to terms with what was happening around her absence. Lawrence was busy with important matters, and she tried to be polite, but this servant's stupid actions drove her to fury. She could not understand how anyone could be so unreasonable and irritate her. The ladies who came to the tea party were delighted with Mrs. Artesia's bracelet. They admired its beauty, could not take their eyes off its sparkling diamonds, and discussed how valuable and unusual it was. They couldn't stop looking at the bracelet, praising it at every step. Every detail seemed perfect to them, and the discussions didn't stop because such a gift could become the pride of any lady. It all ended when they heard the mistress return. The atmosphere in the room immediately changed, and the tension became palpable. The mistress's return always meant something important or dangerous for everyone present. She walked into the room, her gaze filled with rage. Her entire being seemed to emanate a dark aura that made everyone around her feel uneasy and uncomfortable, as if the environment itself was becoming threatening. Artesia had not warned them that she would have to leave them for a while. She had not outlined the situation properly, and now this was becoming a source of misunderstandings that were quickly growing. The lady approached her mother, and instantly all attention was focused on them. It was that moment when any word could be the last in the conversation, and much depended on it. She addressed her mother with restraint, welcoming her back. The simple greeting was an attempt to establish some kind of contact, but its coldness was clearly noticeable and could not hide the tension between them. However, her mother immediately screamed at her, accusing her of being stupid. Her words were full of anger and disappointment, and she could not contain her emotional outburst, which was so strong that it was disconcerting. At one point, the mother grabbed her daughter by the hair, and all the women present were absolutely horrified by what was happening. No words could describe the cruelty with which it was done, and everyone froze. She started beating her, saying that she had already warned her that there could be no normal life with a family member like Artesia. The mother's anger was uncontrollable, and her words full of condemnation tore the atmosphere apart. There was a sharp dislike in her words. She believed that Artesia's place was far from the affairs of the palace, where she should be engaged in household duties and doing such things as embroidery. The ladies present in the room could not remain aloof and began to intervene, trying to stop her. They begged the lady, the Marchioness Rosanna, to stop the violence and calm down, but her fury was unstoppable. Mel, who was watching what was happening, could not stand the tension and fainted. The fear and shock of what was happening before her eyes were so strong that she lost consciousness right at that moment. The Marchioness declared that she would decide for herself what to do with her daughter, and that now was the time to accept gifts, jewelry, and clothes from men. She considered this absurd, since all she had left was blood. The Marchioness pounced on her daughter, knocking her down. The maids tried to hold her back, but to no avail. The atmosphere in the room was tense, and the girl herself was already feeling the full weight of the blow. The mother, with fury in her voice, shouted at her daughter, reminding her that she had given her life, given birth to her, and made her a marquise. All this should have made her grateful, but her daughter, she believed, clearly did not appreciate it. And now, in her opinion, this very daughter is paying for her ingratitude. The woman, not holding back her emotions, continued to scream, accusing her daughter of shamelessness and betrayal, and beat her mercilessly. The woman swung, throwing everything she could get her hands on at her daughter. The daughter was already badly beaten and could barely stand. She tried to hold back her tears, but the pain was too strong to hide. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Archduke Ephron walked into the room. His appearance was unexpected, and it somehow instantly changed the atmosphere, which had previously been filled with shouts and noise. Archduke Ephron approached the girl and asked her with concern if she was okay. His gaze was full of concern, and despite the gravity of the situation, his presence suddenly brought at least partial relief. Artesia, who had not expected to see the Archduke at all, was taken aback. She could not understand why he was there, and at what point his presence became so important. Emotions overwhelmed her. The mother, seeing him, began to scream and be indignant. She demanded an explanation of who had allowed the Archduke to break into someone else's house with such impudence. Soon she drove him away, not wanting to have anything to do with him anymore. She kept telling him to go away, claiming that her mother had told her to, but there was no conviction in her voice. It was clear that she still didn't quite understand what was happening at the moment and what she needed to do. The Duke was clearly annoyed. He said that he had had enough of this and that he would not tolerate such behavior any longer. His words were sharp, and the look he gave him clearly showed his irritation. The Marchioness responded by stating that she alone should be responsible for raising her daughter and saw no reason for interference. She did not understand why anyone should limit her right to do so. The Duke could not restrain himself and seemed to be on the verge of rage. He replied that what was happening now had nothing to do with education and that he would no longer tolerate such an attitude towards his case. Artesia's mother calmly and confidently stated that she knew exactly how to treat her daughter, and no one, especially the Duke, had the right to teach her how to properly raise a child. She was sure that she was right. At that moment, the Duke suddenly approached, grabbed her by the arm, and demanded that she step away without interfering. His actions were decisive, and he was not going to waste time on explanations. Artesia, noticing that his actions were becoming more and more aggressive, tried to stop him. She warned him that if her mother were to get hurt, it would have serious consequences, and the Emperor would certainly be angry. The Duke, ignoring her words, simply picked up Artesia. He carefully wrapped her in a blanket without saying a word. His actions were cold and confident, but there was something unsettling about it. Artesia was in complete shock. She couldn't understand what was happening. Everything that was happening seemed strange and frightening. The Duke only quietly told her not to worry. The Marchioness began to scream in panic, demanding that the Duke release her daughter immediately. This was her daughter, and she was not going to allow anyone to interfere in her family affairs in this way. However, the Duke did not react to her cries. He remained unperturbed, continuing to act at his own discretion. The Marchioness, unable to bear it, screamed that Artesia belonged to her and that no one had the right to take her away. The Duke finally answered, his voice cold and determined, as he said that Artesia was no longer hers, and that he would no longer listen to her claims. The Marchioness thought that she herself should decide whether her daughter would live or die. She did not understand why anyone would interfere in this process, because it was her personal business, and she herself should decide everything. At this time, the servants and His Highness had already approached her, asking if he needed help with anything. The question was asked with genuine attention, and it was clear that they were ready to respond to any of her requests. From today onwards, the young Marquise had to move into a new house. He gave orders that the entire censor to the stars be monitored, and ordered that everything be confiscated down to the smallest detail, so that she could put everything back in its place later. The girl was very beaten. Her condition left much to be desired. She could hardly call Alice, hoping for help, but she looked as if she could barely stand on her feet after severe experiences and injuries. She reported that there were other guests in the house and that Lady Miel had become ill. This was an important remark, since Miel's condition could require immediate assistance, and the girl could not ignore it. The Duke, hearing these words, said that the lady-in-waiting was already aware and would take care of it herself. He added that everything would be under control, and she in turn should take care of her health and recovery. He asked her not to worry and to take care of herself, only not forgetting how important it was to regain her strength in such a difficult situation. Her condition was too grave to think about anything else. The girl looked so beaten that she could barely see her surroundings. She couldn't see clearly, but she felt her strength leaving her, and it was difficult to concentrate on what was happening. Some time later, when she was brought into the room, she was already lying in bed. The doctor examined her, checking how serious her injuries were. He examined her carefully to determine exactly how long it would take for her to recover. When the Duke entered the room, the girl was in the process of treating her wounds. She noticed his presence, and despite her condition, she tried to react somehow. His gaze was directed at her, with curiosity and some excitement. The Duke was surprised by her condition, because he did not know whether she was awake or not. He did not expect to see her in such a state, and it confused him a little, although he tried to keep a calm face. The lady reassured him, saying that everything was fine and he could pass. She noted that if he had come to her with reproaches for her appearance, it would have been completely inappropriate, but he had no such intentions. The gentleman confirmed that he had not thought of any reproaches. He was worried about her. That was why he had come in. It was necessary to somehow sort out the situation. She thanked him, noting that yesterday there had been a misunderstanding, which she now understood. She sincerely thanked him for his help. The gentleman in turn replied that he could not act otherwise, because the situation required intervention, and he could not leave her without attention at such a moment. The girl was surprised to note that she had not even expected him to come in person. She had been sure that his participation would be more formal, but he had shown genuine concern, and this had surprised her more than she had expected. He in turn was also surprised that he had to do everything personally. He did not expect the situation to develop in this way, and that he himself would have to intervene in what was happening to help. He asked if this was really her plan. This was an important point to clarify in order to understand what steps she was planning to take and whether her actions were part of a larger strategy. He thought that yesterday's incident was rather strange. He constantly instructed Alphonse to stay near her, realizing that the situation required special attention and observation to avoid repetition of such moments. He demonstrated his constant presence as proof of his willingness to protect her. It was not only a necessity, but also his own desire to ensure her safety and well-being during this tense period. She and Alphonse all knew perfectly well what was going on. These three knew how things were, but each perceived the situation in his own way. There were no secrets between them, and everything had long since become obvious. But surprisingly, on the day she decided to invite guests, he was not there. He disappeared, and no one could explain exactly why this happened. It was an unexpected turn of events that confused her. At this time, Madame Marquise Rosanna returned Artesia, watching her mother return, said that this did not mean that she knew absolutely everything that was happening around her. She tried to hide her true motives. The gentleman, hearing her words, was not satisfied with the answer. He said that it was too general a phrase, and once again asked her to honestly admit, did she really plan and arrange everything in advance? The girl quietly lowered her head, realizing that her words could not hide the truth. She admitted that yes, everything was carefully thought out, and her plan really did have clear goals, which surprised even herself. However, it was not as others thought. She only invited people on the day of her mother's return, so as not to arouse unnecessary suspicion. Everything was conceived simply, but with a bit of cunning to avoid unnecessary questions. The main goal was to convince those around her that her connection with the Rosan estate had truly been severed. Artesia wanted everyone to believe this, because only then could she act with complete freedom and not fear the consequences. But without a compelling reason, she could not obtain full ownership of Rosan. This was the moment that was important to her strategy, and she understood that one mistake could ruin her plans and return everything to normal. She took the keys and the expense book from the butler, but that was only part of her plan. Everything had to be prepared down to the smallest detail so that not a single detail would cause doubts in the people around her. The Duke did not hold back his anger and began shouting, expressing his dissatisfaction with her actions. He claimed that what she did was completely unnecessary and that the whole situation only made matters worse, causing unnecessary tension. But despite his rage, she stood her ground and confidently said that everything had happened exactly as she had planned. At her words, he suddenly calmed down, realizing that it was useless to argue further.